Chapter 677. Seeing the nervous expressions on Wei Qing and Yu Xing's faces, Du Fei immediately laughed and said, "You know this person too. He's our Shibua." Wei Qing stamped her feet and said, "Shi Xiang, there are several Shibua. Which one is it?" However, Yu Xing suddenly had an idea and said tentatively, "Could it be Shibua Mi Jingzi?" Mi Jingzi was the Taoist name of Zhang Jishuan, the abbot of Yuchan Palace in Hainan. When Du Fei heard this, he nodded approvingly at him and said, "Yes, Shibua Mi Jingzi has a wide range of friends, and he once served as the executive director of the National Taoist Association. He is also a highly respected cultivator, so his words carry much more weight than mine. Go and ask him and see what he thinks." Wei Qing looked at Yu Xing in surprise and laughed. "You're a blockhead, but you're quite quick-witted today." "Not bad." Yu Xing snorted softly. "Let's go and find Shibua Mi Jingzi." After that, he turned around and walked out. Wei Qing quickly shouted, "Hey, wait for me." They were almost there. The two of them rushed to Dingan County in Hainan without stopping. By the time they arrived at Yuchan Palace, it was already a few hours later. Because they were from the same sect, Wei Qing and Yu Xing arrived at Yuchan Palace. After seeing Zhang Jishuan's two disciples and reporting their identities, they were immediately warmly received by the two Taoists, one tall and one short. The tall Taoist smiled and said, "It turns out that the little Shirji of our sect is here. Please come in." "What are you doing here?" Zhang Jishuan's seniority was extremely high, so his disciples' seniority had also risen. Therefore, when they saw the two cultivators of the Chuanjin Dragon sect, one was young and handsome, and the other was young and lovely, they thought that they were a few generations lower than them. However, Wei Qing was unwilling to be at a disadvantage. She said angrily, "You're the Shirji. Du Fei and we are fellow disciples. According to seniority, we should be of the same generation." The tall Taoist raised his head and laughed. Yes, then I'll call you Little Shimmy." Wei Qing snorted. "When did you enter the sect? Tell me. Maybe I'm your Shibua." Yu Xing couldn't stand it anymore. He glared at Wei Qing and said, "Stop it. We're here to look for Uncle Master Mi Jingzi. Who would have the time to dawdle here?" When Wei Qing heard this, she made a face and said, "Well, for your sake, I won't care about this now." After that, she said to the short Taoist beside her with a smile, "Where's Shibua Mi Jingzi? We need to talk to him about something." The short Taoist usually cultivated in seclusion with his senior martial brother in the Jade Toad Palace. He almost never stepped out of the door. He barely left the Ding'an district. Not to mention the outside world, he had not even seen many of his fellow Taoists in the cultivation world. Although Wei Qing's beauty was not as good as that of Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others, she was still a rare beauty. In particular, she was slender and well-proportioned, and her voice was as pleasant as a skylark's. Her smile almost made the short Taoist's soul disappear. He quickly calmed down and focused his mind. After calming himself down a little, he took Wei Qing and Yu Xing to Zhang Jishuan's residence. When they arrived at Zhang Jishuan's residence, Wei Qing saw that Zhang Jishuan lived in a rather simple bungalow. The doors and windows of the room were all made of wood, and the furnishings in the room were extremely simple. Except for a table, a few stools, a futon, a bed, and a sword hanging on the wall, there was nothing else. At a glance, Wei Qing saw that Zhang Jishuan was standing in front of the table, holding a brush and writing calmly. She quickly stood to the side and took a look, only to see that he was writing a couplet. The first line was, "Stealing Kunlun longevity wine," but he was writing the second line. The short Taoist and the tall Taoist led Wei Qing and Yu Xing to Zhang Jishuan's room. When the tall Taoist saw that Zhang Jishuan didn't even raise his head, as if he hadn't seen them, he couldn't help but say, "Master, there are guests." Zhang Jishuan remained silent and continued writing calmly. The tall Taoist said again, "Master, they are junior martial brothers and sisters of the same sect." Wei Qing, who was standing to one side, immediately muttered in a low voice, it's hard to say who is older and who is younger. Zhang Jishuan still didn't say anything, nor did he raise his head. However, he couldn't put down the brush for a long time. After waiting with them for a while, the short Taoist couldn't stand it anymore. He looked at his Shixiang, stepped forward, grabbed the brush from Zhang Jishuan's hand, and said, "Master, there are guests. It's not good for you to neglect them like this, is it?" Zhang Jishuan finally raised his head. His sharp eyes, which seemed to be able to see through people's hearts, glanced at Wei Qing and Yu Sheng. He glared at his two disciples with a sullen face and said, "Don't I have eyes?" As he said this, he smiled at Wei Qing and Yu Sheng. "So it's you. When you were young, I went to attend your master's apprenticeship ceremony." Wei Qing saw Zhang Jishuan's sage-like face. Although he was only 100 years old, he was hale and hearty, and his eyes were sharp. Even young people like her were no match for him. She couldn't help but admire him and thought to herself, "It's said that Shibua Mi Jingzi is a very low-key great cultivator." When the 5 masters of lightning retribution in the world were ranked, if he hadn't kept a low profile and not participated, I'm afraid that he would have had a place among the 5 masters of lightning retribution in the world. Even Yu Sheng, who was young and arrogant, restrained his spirit in front of Zhang Jishuan. He bowed respectfully and then quickly told Zhang Jishuan the purpose of their visit. After that, Wei Qing said, "Shibua Mi Jingzi, now you're the only one who can stand up for him. Hurry up and think of a way." Zhang Jishuan sighed softly, shook his head, and didn't say anything. Soon, Wei Qing and Yu Sheng's hearts suddenly skipped a beat. Wei Qing knew that something was wrong and quickly asked, "Shibua, what's wrong? Can't you do anything about it?" Zhang Jishuan sighed and said, "There is a way, but I don't think it's the right way to decide everything by the outcome of a fight. The ultimate goal of cultivation is to live forever, ascend to immortality, and explore the ultimate mystery of the human body and the universe. I believe that when your master first taught you how to cultivate, it was not for you to fight, was it not?" Wei Qing smiled bitterly and said, "Shibua, now that the Japanese are right in front of us, what's the use of saying this? Hurry up and say hello to the higher-ups. They can only lose, but they can't win. Who can bear this?" Zhang Jishuan was silent for a while, then suddenly said, "I think you're mistaken about one thing." Wei Qing asked curiously, "What is it?" Zhang Jishuan said, "I know more or less about the Japanese cultivation world. Although the Japanese cultivation world has been stagnant in recent hundreds of years and has rarely made any progress, most of the power of Japanese cultivators comes from religious beliefs, so their power is inherited. Moreover, for thousands of years, the Japanese cultivation world has never been cut off. No matter how the situation in Japan changes, the Japanese cultivation world can always find a way out in the great changes, cater to the changes, make changes, and further accumulate their own strength. On the other hand, the Wuxia cultivation world, which was at its peak during the Song, Yuan Ming and Ming dynasties, was once so powerful that the Japanese didn't even dare to look at us directly. But now, in the past 100 years, almost all the elites of the cultivation world have been lost. Alas, the river is going from bad to worse." Wei Qing was angry when she heard this. She argued, "But Shibua, no matter what, we won't lose to these Japanese. If we can fight fairly, I don't believe that we will lose to them." Zhang Jishuan glanced at Wei Qing and then at Yu Sheng. He smiled and said, "Then answer me. Why couldn't you even beat a teenage girl at the Taoist assembly? Could it be that you two inner disciples are inferior to a little baby?" Wei Qing blushed and said unconvincingly, "She is the future goddess of the Tachibana family, not a nobody." Yu Sheng pondered for a while and said, "Shibua, you mean, because the Japanese cultivation world has never been cut off for thousands of years, and it is a country where all the people believe in religion, the power of faith is extremely strong, so it is very easy for their cultivators to cultivate. Is that right?" Zhang Jishuan nodded. "That's right. Except for a few great cultivators in the Japanese cultivation world who can overcome their narrow-minded racism and seriously and humbly learn from our Wuxia cultivation world and eventually cultivate to the highest realm, it is very difficult for the rest of the cultivators to step into the real peak realm. Do you know why? Yusheng said, is it because it is too easy for them to get their strength, so when they cultivate to a higher realm in the future, they can't climb up? Zhang Jishuan smiled and said, you're a smart boy. Now do you know why many cultivators in the Japanese cultivation world have gone to Hua to learn from us over the years? Now some Japanese cultivators have also discovered this. They believe that only by learning from others can they achieve positive results. However, the views of such people are not valued in the Japanese cultivation world, and they are even severely suppressed. Wei Qing asked with a puzzled face, but... Shibua, what does this have to do with what you said before? Zhang Jishuan shook his head and sighed. There's something wrong with your comprehension. Didn't I say it before? The Japanese get their strength quickly and easily, so do you think that even if someone sets a rule for you that you can only lose and not win, you will definitely win? Wei Qing was very unhappy when she heard this. Shibua, what do you mean? Isn't this boosting the morale of others and destroying our own prestige? Zhang Jishuan smiled and said, then do you know what it means to know yourself and know your enemy? Come on, let me ask you, are there any yin-yang masters among the Japanese cultivators who came this time? Wei Qing immediately nodded and said, yes. There are yin-yang masters from the Abe family and the Kamo family. Zhang Jishuan asked again, these two families are yin-yang master families with hundreds or even thousands of years of tradition. Do you know who they are? Wei Qing said as if she was counting her family treasures, the patriarchs of the two families are here. Zhang Jishuan smiled and said, Abe is right, Kamo. These two are great masters in the Japanese cultivation world. Among the cultivators of the younger generation in the Hua cultivation world, no one is a match for them. As soon as he said this, his two disciples were immediately unhappy. The taller disciple shouted, Master, am I that old? No matter what, I am still a cultivator of the younger generation, right? How can I not beat these two old Japanese? Zhang Jishuan glared at them and said, you two are Jinshin masters that I helped you open up your meridians with qi and countless elixirs. How many times have you fought? Apart from the number of times you have practiced with each other on a daily basis, can you count the number of fingers on your hands? You don't even have any actual combat experience, yet you want to fight with others? I'm laughing my head off. Do you know how dangerous it is to fight with masters of their level? If you are not careful, your body and soul will be destroyed. You two little Jinshin, what are you showing off for? It's as if you're afraid that others won't know. The tall Daoist and the short Daoist were blushing from his scolding, they kept quiet and kept quiet. Wei Qing, however, widened her eyes and looked at the two of them with new eyes. Wow, are you two Jinshin masters? That's amazing. Yusheng looked at them enviously, but then he lowered his eyes, a trace of unwillingness and indignation flashing in them. Zhang Jishuan shook his head and said to Wei Qing, don't pay attention to these two guys who have never seen the world. How dare they speak so arrogantly with a small Jinshin? They are really frogs at the bottom of a well. In addition to the Onmyoji, do you know who else in the Japanese cultivation world has come? Wei Qing thought for a moment and said, there are also the abbots of the Tiantai sect, the Pure Land sect, the Fahua sect, the True Word sect, and other Buddhist sects, as well as the great priests and goddesses of many Japanese Shinto cultivation sections. Zhang Jishuan looked worried. He shook his head and said, this time, they have come out in full force. All the masters of the Japanese cultivation world have come. Not to mention others, I have seen the sect master of the Tiantai sect, Imagawa Kagumo. His cultivation is earth-shattering. Even I dare not say that I can win. As for the Pure Land sect, they are even more powerful. Their sect master, Masamura Siyuan, is a great cultivator. In the current cultivation world of China, I'm afraid that only the former Wang Yuanshan and the current Zhang Tianshi can match him. As for the others, alas. Wei Qing was dumbfounded and stammered, Shibua, do you mean, even if we fight fairly, we can't win? Zhang Jishuan sighed and said, they came prepared as a group, but we are scattered sand. We are hindered from all sides, and we are besieged both internally and externally. Everyone has their own plans, and every sect has their own plans. How should we deal with such a situation? Wei Qing straightened her neck and said, I don't believe that the Japanese are monolithic. There are many people from the Shinto sect here. The Shinto sect has always been at odds with the Buddhists. I don't believe that they can work together. Zhang Jishuan said, You're right, but the power of the Shinto sect is still above that of the Japanese Buddhism. The great priest of the Ise Shinto, Ise Shinguang, is also a great cultivator. His strength is not inferior to that of Masamura Seiyuan. The goddess, Ise Chuyun, is a weirdo in the Japanese female cultivation world. She is a genius that is rarely seen in 100 years. Moreover, she inherited the power of the gods of the Japanese Shinto sect. She is a female expert at the level of the Ksitagarbha goddess. In terms of fighting, except for Masako Tachibana, who can mobilize the power of the immortal Wisdom King, no one else is her match. Wei Qing was stunned. Ah! How could a little girl be more powerful than Zhang Tianshi? It can't be, can it? This is too exaggerated, isn't it? Zhang Jishuan shook his head and said, No, the cultivators of the Shinto sect can only exert 100% of their strength in the shrine. Wei Qing patted her chest and said, I was scared to death. I thought that a young girl like her could beat Zhang Tianshi. That's really unreasonable. If Zhang Tianshi appears, will he be able to defeat the Japanese cultivators? Zhang Jishuan shook his head again. No. Given Zhang Tianshi's character, he will definitely not come out of seclusion to take care of these things. Moreover, Zhang Tianshi has already passed the thunder tribulation, and the spring thunderstorm season is coming. At that time, it is very likely that he will break through the 9th stage of the thunder tribulation and reach the great way of the golden immortal. It can be said that he has already taken half a step into the immortal world. How could he care about these secular affairs? Wei Qing forced a smile and said, There must be someone who can deal with them, right? At least, Shibua, you can deal with them, right? However, Zhang Jishuan had a rare serious expression on his face. He said slowly, No, I can't go. As soon as he finished speaking, Wei Qing, Yu Sheng, and his 2 disciples immediately exclaimed, Why? Chapter 678. Zhang Jishuan's 2 disciples were surprised and said angrily, Master, the enemy is here. How can you not come out of the mountain? Zhang Jishuan shook his head. No, you can't fight in this battle. I advise you not to go. Wei Qing looked at Zhang Jishuan disappointedly. Shibua, I thought you were a strong cultivator who was not afraid of these bureaucratic nonsense. I didn't expect you to be the same as Shixiang and the others. Zhang Jishuan sighed and said, Little Shiji, have you ever thought about why I'm hiding in Dingan County at the corner of Tiannan and secretly taking care of my disciples? Wei Qing's heart suddenly trembled when she heard this. She thought to herself, yes, Shibua used to be the chairman of the Taoist Association. Why did he end up living in this remote place? Wei Qing asked tentatively, Shibua, did he offend someone? Or? Zhang Jishuan waved his hand and said, Don't mention the past anymore. Besides, I've already sworn that I will never fight with anyone again. Therefore, I can't go to this battle, nor can I speak for you, because I can't speak either. Wei Qing and Yu Sheng were greatly disappointed, and their faces were gloomy. Zhang Jishuan smiled slightly and comforted them, Don't think about it anymore. If you don't want to lose, then don't participate in this battle. You can't afford to provoke them, but you can always hide. Moreover, this time, the Japanese cultivation world has come prepared. They are coming aggressively, and it's definitely not a good situation. It's very dangerous. As the saying goes, it's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. When you all become great cultivators, it won't be too late to get back at them. Yusheng didn't say anything, but his clenched fists had already betrayed his thoughts. Wei Qing, on the other hand, said in a low voice with an extremely heavy heart, Shibua, we understand. If you have nothing else to say, we'll go first. Zhang Jishuan sighed softly and said, well, go. In the path of cultivation, you can't fight for a short time. Take a long-term view. Wei Qing and Yu Sheng had come excitedly and left dejectedly. Seeing Wei Qing leave, Zhang Jishuan's short disciple couldn't help turning his head and shouting at Zhang Jishuan, Master, if you don't want to go, can't you let us go? The taller disciple also said angrily, Yes, Master, we didn't swear that we couldn't go. Zhang Jishuan snorted. Fine, your legs are on your bodies anyway. Do you think I'd lock you up? His two disciples were overjoyed. Master, you agree? Zhang Jishuan sneered and said, If you go, don't come back, and don't call me master again. The tall Daoist and the short Daoist's faces fell. The tall Daoist shouted, Why? Zhang Jishuan said with a cold expression, Because I don't want to see you all throw away your lives. I didn't bring you all out to throw away your lives. If anything happens to you all, who will inherit my legacy? His two disciples immediately stopped talking. After they looked at each other, they suppressed their anger and said, Master, I understand. After that, they swallowed their anger and left Zhang Jishuan's room. Zhang Jishuan watched them leave and sighed heavily. He picked up the brush again and wanted to continue writing the second half of the couplet. But every time he raised the brush and was about to put it down, he felt that the brush in his hand was as heavy as Mount Tai, and his heart was in a mess. After a long time, Zhang Jishuan, who had been unable to write, suddenly put the brush in his hand down in frustration. The soft tip of the brush suddenly became like the sharp tip of a spear, piercing into the hard mahogany table with a poof, and standing upright on the table like a flagpole. Zhang Jishuan stared at the brush in front of him, his eyes flickering. After a long time, he suddenly turned around and strode in the direction of Haikao City. He walked all the way. Although he was nearly 100 years old, his footsteps were as fast as the wind, and his body was as swift as a galloping horse. In addition, he chose to walk in sparsely populated places, so along the way, he was even faster than a speeding car on the highway. When he was about to reach Haikao City, Zhang Jishuan slowed down and went straight to the National Hotel on Holiday Beach. After arriving at the National Hotel, Zhang Jishuan hesitated for a moment at the door, then strode into the hotel and went straight to Li Yundong's room. After knocking on the door for a while, Zhang Jishuan found that the person who opened the door was a tall, beautiful woman with an extraordinary temperament. Zhang Jishuan was stunned. Excuse me, does Li Yundong live here? This woman was none other than Zi Yuan, who was responsible for guarding Li Yundong today. When Zi Yuan saw Zhang Jishuan, her heart suddenly skipped a beat. She asked tentatively, Are you Taoist Mi Jingzi? Zhang Jishuan laughed. Do you know me? Zi Yuan quickly bowed respectfully and said with a smile, Taoist, please come in. I'm Zi Yuan of the Linggong sect. Jinren, please come in. I'm sorry I didn't go out to welcome you. Zhang Jishuan waved his hand and walked in with a smile. You don't have to be so polite, Jinren Zi Yuan. Your name is well known to me. As he said this, he looked at Zi Yuan seriously and couldn't help nodding and praising her. Well, you are indeed a famous female cultivator. Not bad, not bad. Even Wang Yuanshan didn't have such a cultivation quotient as you back then. You are really better than him. Zi Yuan smiled slightly and said, Taoist, you flatter me. I just got to where I am today by chance. In terms of cultivation quotient, how could I dare to look up to you? Zhang Jishuan chuckled. He stroked his beard and said, Well, don't flatter me. I didn't come here today to listen to your praise. Zi Yuan smiled and said, Jinren Zhang, are you here to see Li Yundong? Zhang Jishuan smiled and said, You are so smart. You guessed my intention at once. Zi Yuan couldn't help but look at Li Yundong, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor and meditating. After Li Yundong read the Vajra longevity power that you passed to him, he couldn't restrain his excitement, so he specially asked us to protect him and cultivate here. Zhang Jishuan looked at Li Yundong strangely, shook his head and sighed. I have lived for so many years, but this is the first time I have seen someone cultivating in meditation in a hotel. It's really him. However, since the Tao of cultivation has been enlightened, it is indeed necessary to enter meditation immediately. Otherwise, if the time is delayed, it will be twice the effort with half the result. As he said this, he walked to the front of Li Yundong and looked at him fixedly for a while. Suddenly, his eyes widened, and his murderous fingers were like spears and swords, stabbing toward Li Yundong's forehead. This move was as fast as lightning, as fast as thunder, and it happened so suddenly that even Zi Yuan was shocked. She immediately reached out subconsciously to grab Zhang Jishuan's wrist. She knew that if Zhang Jishuan's finger went down, he could even poke a hole in a rock, let alone a person's forehead. However, in the blink of an eye, Zhang Jishuan's swift and violent finger rushed to Li Yundong's forehead and stopped 2 centimeters away. At this time, Zi Yuan's hand also suddenly froze in midair, 2 inches away from Zhang Jishuan's hand. Zhang Jishuan saw that Li Yundong seemed to be unaware of his finger, and his face was still calm and without any reaction. He nodded slightly and said, "Not bad, not thinking, not doing, not forgetting about things and me. This is the real realm of the unity of heaven and man, the realm of spiritual travel." Only then did Zi Yuan feel relieved. Her heart, which had jumped into her throat, fell back into her chest. She knew that Zhang Jishuan had just been purely testing Li Yundong's realm and the depth of his meditation at this time. With Li Yundong's current cultivation realm, even if he was in meditation, if someone wanted to sneak attack him from the outside world, he would immediately subconsciously defend himself. This kind of defense was the instinctive reaction of a great cultivator at the Jinshan level, Niden and primordial spirit. If Li Yundong was not deep in meditation at this time and had not entered the realm of forgetting about things and being one with heaven and man, he would immediately wake up and fight back after being poked by Zhang Jishuan's finger. But once a great cultivator entered the realm of Yang spirit, leaving the body, spiritual travel, even if ordinary people chopped off their heads with a knife, they would not wake up. It could be said that at this time, great cultivators would have no strength to truss a chicken, and ordinary children could stab them to death with a knife. This was also the reason why Li Yundong wanted to find someone to protect him. Zi Yuan asked tentatively, "Taoist Mi Jingzi, do you know when Li Yundong will wake up?" Zhang Jishuan smiled and said, "I'm not an immortal. How would I know? I came here this time because if Zhenrenli hasn't left yet, I want to compare notes with him on cultivation. But I didn't expect him to be so eager that he would enter meditation and cultivate here. I really admire him." Zi Yuan smiled and said, "Isn't that because the classics you wrote are so exquisite that he can't help himself?" Zhang Jishuan smiled and said, "I didn't write all of them. They were all passed on to me by my master. I just sorted them out." As he said this, he glanced at the Vajra longevity skill that was spread out beside Zi Yuan and suddenly asked, "Did you also read this?" Zi Yuan said with some fear, "Yes, if you think it's inappropriate, then I." Zhang Jishuan waved his hand and suddenly asked, "What is Vajra skill?" Zi Yuan was stunned, but she quickly realized that Zhang Jishuan was testing her. She immediately replied, "Vajra skill is a kind of external skill that trains the body and the internal organs. The trick is to use the rigid internal strength qi in the body to dredge the meridians of the whole body, so that the body can be as strong as Vajra." Zhang Jishuan didn't comment and asked again, "What is longevity skill?" Just as Zi Yuan was about to speak, she suddenly heard a knock on the door. Su Chan's clear voice came from outside the door. "Sister Zi Yuan, we're back." After that, she and Zhou Qin pushed the door open and entered, followed by Lu Feier, who was talking and laughing with her. Chao Kefi was behind Lu Feier. Zi Yuan glanced at them. Just as she was about to stand up and introduce them to Zhang Jishuan suddenly shouted, "The Great Way is in front of you. Why are you distracted?" Zi Yuan suddenly shivered and no longer looked at Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and the others. She respectfully replied to Zhang Jishuan, "Longevity skill is an internal skill that trains the mind and cultivates the innate qi of people. Its trick is to focus on relaxation and nature, concentrate on using many soft curved movements, communicate the innate qi of heaven and earth, and blend it with the primordial qi of the internal organs of the human body, so that people can enter the gate of Xianpin, refine the essence into qi, refine the qi into the spirit, and return the 5 qi to the origin. Finally, it can reach the Wuji realm of refining the spirit to return to the void, returning to Wuji, forgetting everything, and becoming one with nature. Zhang Jishuan nodded. Then tell me, which is more important, Vajra skill or longevity skill? At this time, Zhou Qin and Su Chan, who had just entered the door, also realized that the old man in a white shirt, a black hat, and a half-foot-long white beard in front of them must be Zhang Jishuan, the author of Vajra longevity skill. Zhou Qin immediately turned around and made a silent gesture to Lu Feier and Chao Kefi. She said in a low voice, Zhenren Zhang is passing on his skills. Let's not disturb them. Let's leave. Su Chan looked at Zhang Jishuan curiously and said in a low voice, but Zhenren Zhang doesn't seem to want to drive us away. Sister Zhou Qin, why don't we listen from the side? Zhou Qin also wanted to listen to Zhang Jishuan's teachings. After all, this kind of opportunity was not something that ordinary people could encounter. She glanced at Su Chan and said tentatively in a low voice, then, just listen to a few words. Su Chan also smiled slyly and nodded like a chick pecking at rice. Yes, just a few words. Like thieves, the two of them entered the room quietly. As soon as they sat down, they turned their heads and saw Lu Feier and Chao Kefi standing at the door in a daze, at a loss for what to do. Zhou Qin quickly made a gesture to them to close the door, indicating for them to go out and close the door. However, because of her relationship with Li Yundong, Lu Feier had long been full of curiosity and admiration for him. Therefore, when she saw a Taoist priest preaching in the room, her curiosity and gossiping soul suddenly burned. After closing the door behind her, she pulled Chao Kefi into the room quietly. Chapter 679. Lu Feier and Chao Kefi's actions made Zhou Qin and Su Chan look at each other, for fear that Zhang Jishuan would lose his temper and stop teaching them. But to their surprise, Zhang Jishuan didn't seem to notice their existence. He still asked and answered Ziyuan as if there was no one else around. Only then did Zhou Qin and Su Chan feel relieved. They quietly listened to Zhang Jishuan's teaching. The two of them were already masters of cultivation. Although they had reached the primary level of the Jinshin, their cultivation of magic was still far from that of great cultivators. Especially in terms of understanding of the great way of cultivation, the two of them were far inferior to Ziyuan and Li Yunyang. Therefore, when a supreme master like Zhang Jishuan was preaching here, the two of them eagerly absorbed the meaning of every word Zhang Jishuan said. However, the two of them had a certain cultivation foundation, so they listened with relish. From time to time, they would suddenly realize something. However, Lu Feier, who had no cultivation foundation, was confused. She had no idea what the old Taoist and Ziyuan were talking about. She could understand every word they said, but when they were put together, she didn't understand anything at all. Lu Feier's interest waned and she looked around resentfully. However, she saw at a glance that Chao Kefi was listening very attentively. Her eyes flashed as if she had understood something. She couldn't help but pull Chao Kefi's sleeve strangely and whisper, "Sister Chao, do you understand?" However, Chao Kefi didn't seem to hear anything. She still listened attentively to Zhang Jishuan's teaching. Seeing that she was ignoring her, Lu Feier was very disappointed. She grabbed Chao Kefi's arm and whispered, "Sister Chao, Sister Chao." At this time, Chao Kefi suddenly turned her head, and a sharp light flashed in her eyes. In an instant, her black pupils seemed to be stained with blood, turning bright red and ferocious. She glared at her fiercely and said, "Shut up." Lu Feier was shocked, but when she calmed down and looked at Chao Kefi again, she found that the color of her eyes had only changed for a moment. In the blink of an eye, they had turned back to black. Lu Feier was frightened by Chao Kefi's words. Her heart was pounding, and she sat where she was. She didn't dare to speak again, but her mind was in a mess. Sister Chow, what happened just now? Is this my illusion? Seeing that Lu Feier was silent, Chow Kefi turned her head back and listened attentively to Zhang Zhishuan's preaching, as if she had never shown any abnormality just now. Almost there, Zhang Zhishuan didn't seem to be aware of what was going on here. He continued to ask and answer questions quickly with Zi Yuan. When he felt that Zi Yuan's answers were wrong, he would correct her. After more than an hour of talking and answering, Zhang Zhishuan stood up and patted the corner of his clothes, as if to brush away the dust on his body. He said freely, Zhenren Zi Yuan is indeed worthy of being Wang Yuanshan's disciple. Your cultivation foundation is extremely solid. Compared with you, my two disciples are like naive children. I'm ashamed. Zi Yuan quickly stood up, bowed respectfully, and said, Taoist priest, you flatter me. Zhang Zhishuan smiled slightly and waved his hand. Only then did he look at Zhou Qin and Su Chan, and finally at Chow Kefi. He gave her a meaningful look, then withdrew his gaze and said, well, it's really lively here today. I'll go first. After that, he walked slowly toward the door. Zi Yuan hurriedly stepped forward and said, Taoist priest, let me see you off. The two of them walked out of the hotel. When they reached the side of the road, Zi Yuan asked doubtfully, Taoist priest Mi Jingzi, I saw you looking at President Chow with a special meaning in your eyes just now. Could it be? Zhang Zhishuan smiled and looked at Zi Yuan with appreciation. Not only is she smart, but she's also very careful. Amazing, amazing. I really envy Wang Yuanshan. You must be very curious as to why I would preach in front of her, right? Zi Yuan nodded. Could it be that Taoist priest is testing something? Zhang Zhishuan said, yes, but also not. However, in addition to her, isn't there a little fox next to you? Hey, sometimes the great way of cultivation doesn't have to be spread through ordinary people. Otherwise, why did Zen Master Baizhang enlighten the rock fox back then? Zi Yuan hesitated and said, however, it is precisely because Zen Master Baizhang enlightened the rock fox that the Fox Zen school appeared. It is also because of the Fox Zen school that the mystical silver fox appeared. It is precisely because of the mystical silver fox that there has been a 60-year period of chaos and the current conflict in the cultivation world. Zhang Zhishuan laughed and said, we Taoist cultivators pay attention to our own fate. This means that Taoist cultivators can control their own life, aging, illness, and death through cultivation, instead of being controlled by God. However, there is nothing we can do about such a coincidental change of fate. Even if there is no Zen Master Baizhang to enlighten the rock fox, there will be Zen Master Qianzhang and Zen Master Wanzhang. It is destined that the Fox Zen school will appear. It is destined that the rock fox will be enlightened. It is destined that the mystical silver fox will create chaos. This is not something you and I can change. As he spoke, Zhang Zhishuan pondered for a while and said, as for your friend who calls herself President Chow, although I can see that she is a demon, not all demons are bad. Therefore, I can't control whether she will be good or bad in the future, and I don't want to control it. Zi Yuan asked, but what if one day, she turns against us and becomes our enemy? What should we do? Taoist priest, aren't you helping the wicked? Zhang Zhishuan laughed and said, didn't I teach the three of you? It can't be that the three of you are no match for her, can it? Zi Yuan seemed to have understood something and asked tentatively, Taoist priest, could it be that you have already found out about her? However, Zhang Zhishuan waved his hand and interrupted her, saying, no, I came here this time to help my little friend in cultivation, but I didn't expect that he had already spread his wings and soared above the ninth heaven. I can't help him even if I want to. But since you are here, I might as well compete with you. We can exchange cultivation experiences with each other, which can be regarded as my contribution to the cultivation world. As he said this, he said with emotion, I came out of the mountain in 1993, and my greatest emotion was the difficulty and hardships of spreading the way of cultivation. When you reach my age, you will understand that the three most important things in the world are preaching, teaching, and dispelling doubts. Other things are just fleeting clouds, not worth worrying about. After that, he smiled and nodded to Ziyuan. Well, that's it. I'll go first. You can go back. Ziyuan watched Zhang Jishuan float away and sighed inwardly. Taoist priest is extremely broad-minded. It's really hard for ordinary people to understand. When she returned to the room, she saw Zhou Qin and Su Chan sitting by the bed in a daze. Their eyes were dull, and they looked as if they were in a trance. Obviously, they were absorbed in Zhang Jishuan's words. As for Lu Feier, she was sitting alone, looking puzzled and worried. Ziyuan asked curiously, Lu Feier, where is President Chao? Lu Feier said with a sullen face, she left me and went back by herself. As she said this, she suddenly raised her head and looked at Ziyuan hesitantly, as if she wanted to say something. Seeing her like this, Ziyuan immediately smiled and said, What's wrong? What do you want to say? Lu Feier said hesitantly, Ziyuan, I always feel that there seems to be something wrong with Sister Chao recently. She sometimes gives me a strange feeling, as if she is another person. Ziyuan's heart skipped a beat, but she acted as if nothing had happened. She still smiled lightly and said, Oh? What do you mean? Lu Feier sat up straight and said, Last time, I saw her not sleeping in the middle of the night. She was playing magic by the window alone, as if she could also cultivate magic. Just now, when she was listening to this Taoist priest's preaching, she was also very serious. I talked to her, but she was still fierce to me. She looked so scary. Ziyuan laughed and said, President Chao has been in poor health since she was a child. It's understandable that she is dedicated to the Tao. Maybe you are thinking too much. Lu Feier stared at Ziyuan for a long time. Seeing that she didn't seem to be perfunctory, she stood up and said with flagging interest, Maybe. I'll go back first. See you tomorrow. After watching Lu Feier go out the door, she turned around and happened to see Zhou Qin and Su Chan looking at her. Obviously, the two of them had heard the conversation between her and Lu Feier and had woken up with a start. Zhou Qin said with a serious face, Has the mystical silver fox begun to awaken? Ziyuan hesitated for a moment and said, If I'm not wrong, it should be the instinct of the mystical silver fox that is awakening. After being sealed for more than 1,000 years, the soul of the mystical silver fox is not complete. Her divine sense and memories are scattered. She has even forgotten all the magic she has cultivated. Only the purest power of Yuanyin remains in her body. Therefore, it is equivalent to her cultivating again. Every time someone mentions the way of cultivation, it will arouse her memory about cultivation and restore her cultivation. Zhou Qin was shocked. So you mean, her power is still there, but she has forgotten how to use it? Ziyuan nodded. That's about it. Su Chan, who had been silent all this time, looked at Li Jiandong worriedly. Yundong, wake up quickly. If you don't wake up, the mystical silver fox will wake up. Zhou Qin also said with a wry smile, Master, where is your yang spirit now? Can you hear us? If you can hear us, come back quickly. Things are getting more and more serious. While she was speaking, she heard a knock at the door. Zhou Qin was stunned. She turned her head and shouted, Come in, the door is not locked. Soon, the door was pushed open. It was Ruan Hongling who poked her head in. After a tentative look, she immediately pushed the door open and rushed in like the wind. She rushed to Ziyuan's side, hugged her, and said loudly, Shiji Ziyuan, something's wrong. Ziyuan, Su Chan, and Zhou Qin suddenly became nervous and asked in unison, What happened? Ruan Hongling quickly took out a golden invitation card from her pocket and said, Shiji, look. Ziyuan took it and frowned slightly. She raised her head unhappily and said to Ruan Hongling, Is this also a matter? Didn't you know about this a long time ago? It's reasonable to send a golden invitation now. Is it worth it for you to rush here and make a fuss? Ruan Hongling shook her head like a rattle drum. Soon, she took out another golden invitation and said, Shiji, look again. Zi Yuan was stunned. Another one? Where is this from? But she soon saw that the inscription and content on it were almost the same. The only difference was that the date had changed. Zi Yuan said in surprise, the Zhengyi school has brought forward the inauguration ceremony of the leader? Why? Ruan Hongling grabbed Zi Yuan's arm tightly with both hands and said, yes, it's in 2 days. What should we do, Shiji? Su Chan and Zhou Qin both looked at the golden invitation nervously. They were caught off guard and cried out involuntarily, what? Damn it, the Zhengyi school is so hateful. How can this kind of thing be brought forward so easily? I'm going back to Shanghai today to visit my sick mother-in-law. I'd like to ask for leave from everyone and update 1 chapter in advance. In addition, if I don't update the 2nd chapter before 10 o'clock in the evening, I won't be able to update today. I'd like to apologize to everyone first. I hope you can understand. Just take it that I'm asking for leave today. Chapter 680. The sudden change of the Zhengyi school shocked Su Chan and the others. Ruan Hongling said to them anxiously, I don't know, but I saw on the TV news that a delegation from the Japanese cultivation world has come to our country. I think it might have something to do with this. Zhou Qin's eyes lit up. She clenched one hand into a fist and pounded the palm of her other hand. That makes sense. This time, the Japanese cultivation world has come to our country with great fanfare. They must have been highly valued by the upper echelons. Judging from the conduct of these officials, they must want to keep the peace and avoid causing any trouble, so they will definitely restrain our cultivation sects. The Zhengyi school has always been the most powerful sect in the cultivation world. If there is a conflict in the cultivation world, they will definitely be the first to bear the brunt. Moreover, the people of the Zhengyi school must be afraid that when they hold the inauguration ceremony, they will come to attack us. At that time, they won't know where to hide even if they want to. Ruan Hongling blurted out, yes, Zhou Qin, you are so smart. Why didn't I think of this? After all, Zhou Qin was born in the officialdom. In the blink of an eye, she had seen through their tricks. She chuckled and said, good method, good method. Not only can they catch us off guard, but they can also catch the Japanese cultivation world off guard. They can also avoid the sharp edge and force the Japanese cultivation world to make a choice at this time. Either you come with the group of people now, or you leave. You anyway, we won't wait for your people to be ready before we meet you. When your people are ready, we will leave. It's amazing, it's a good plan. I just don't know who came up with this idea. Ruan Hongling said angrily, you're still praising them? The question now is, what should we do? Su Chan said in a weak voice, yes, Yundong is still in a trance. What if he doesn't wake up at that time? As soon as she said this, the room suddenly fell silent. Zi Yuan held the 2 golden invitations in her hand and looked at them over and over with sparkling eyes. After a long time, she said slowly in a low voice, Hongling, Su Chan, Zhou Qin, I think. I'm afraid we have to be prepared that Li Yundong won't be able to arrive in time. Everyone's hearts sank, and they couldn't help but look at Li Yundong. From the day Su Chan met Li Yundong, she had been living under his wings. Although at the beginning, he was still very young, and his wings couldn't withstand much wind and rain. But now, he was already a man of indomitable spirit. Suddenly losing his protection, Su Chan suddenly felt empty in her heart, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. You almost there. Su Chan was like this, so were Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan. When she had gone down the mountain, she had never thought that she would have to rely on this descendant of Jin Dan to help her in the future. However, after getting along with him for so many days, he had always turned the tide in desperate situations and turned the rotten into the magical and the impossible. Even Zi Yuan didn't know when she had started to secretly agree that this boy had grown into a towering tree. At first, he had lived under her shade, but now, she was living under his wings. If he didn't wake up, could she successfully take over as the leader of the Lingang sect? Although Wan Hongling had always liked to bicker with Li Yundong and have some small conflicts with him, when she heard the news that Li Yundong might not be able to make it in time, she really felt that the sky was going to collapse. Although Shiji was powerful, it was difficult for her to fight against so many people. When the time came for the inauguration ceremony of the leader and the Genie school was suddenly in trouble, how could they resist at that time? Wan Hongling was burning with anxiety for a moment. She grabbed Zi Yuan's arm and said, "Shiji, we." However, Zi Yuan didn't wait for her to finish and interrupted her. Her expression was surprisingly serious. "Hongling, stop talking. When I didn't go down the mountain, why weren't you worried at that time? Why are you so worried now?" Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, said seriously, "Zi Yuan, don't worry. Master is not here, but we are." Su Chan also nodded vigorously and said, "Yes, Sister Zi Yuan. Don't worry, we will definitely support you." However, Zi Yuan shook her head and said, "Times have changed. If Li Yundong can make it in time, then your support will be very helpful. But now that Li Yundong is not here, if you force yourself to stand up, it will definitely be a terrible disaster. It's absolutely impossible." As she said this, she turned her face and said to Zhou Qin and Su Chan with a cold face, "You can't go to the inauguration ceremony of the leader of the Lingang sect." Su Chan exclaimed, "Why? Sister Zi Yuan, why won't you let us go?" Zhou Qin looked angry. "Zi Yuan, don't you believe us?" Wan Hongling also stared at Zi Yuan with her eyes wide open, as if she couldn't believe her ears. "Shiji, are you crazy? We're weak in the first place." However, Zi Yuan shouted in a rare stern voice, "It's because we are weaker than before that you can't go. Moreover, this is a matter of our Lingang sect. We can't involve you." Wan Hongling couldn't stop tears from rolling in her eyes. "Shiji, you." Without waiting for her to finish speaking, Zi Yuan said firmly, "I am the 45th generation of the Lingang sect, the future leader of the Lingang sect, and your eldest Shiji, so you must listen to me. Now, come back to Mount Longhu with me. We can't drag others into the affairs of our Lingang sect. Puff out your chest and stop crying. Don't embarrass your master." After that, she turned her head and stared at Su Chan and Zhou Qin with sharp eyes. "You two stay here to protect Li Yundong. Hongling and I will go back to the mountain. If Li Yundong wakes up before the ceremony, you will come with him. If he doesn't, don't come again." Su Chan looked anxious. She wanted to speak again, but Zhou Qin grabbed her and motioned for her to stop. Zhou Qin said in a deep voice, "Zi Yuan, don't you know that if you make such a decision, the Lingang sect is likely to be destroyed in your hands?" A hint of sadness flashed across Zi Yuan's eyes, but she soon returned to her calm and elegant fairy appearance. She said lightly, "Even the sun and the moon will perish, let alone our Lingang sect. If this is the will of heaven, then let this sect, which has been passed down for nearly 1,000 years, perish in my hands. At least, it will not perish in the hands of others." After that, she turned around and walked out of the door resolutely. Wan Hongling wiped away her tears and said in a choked voice, "Shiji, wait for me. I'll go with you." Su Chan subconsciously took a step forward, but she heard Zhou Qin behind her shout in a low voice, "Su Chan, don't let Zi Yuan's kindness down. If we go, as Zi Yuan said, not only will we not be able to help, but we will also likely implicate Zi Yuan. You will be there soon." Su Chan was so anxious that she stamped her feet. "Then what should we do now?" Zhou Qin let out a long sigh. She let go of her hand, sat down cross-legged, and looked at Li Yundong fixedly. "Now we can only pray that Master will wake up soon." Thinking of this, Su Chan immediately sat down cross-legged and put her palms together. She said to Zhou Qin, "Sister Zhou Qin, why don't you recite Buddhist scriptures with me? Last time Yundong refined the burning thumb pot and was trapped in the spirit space, I kept reciting the scriptures. Later, it came true, and Sister Zi Yuan and you came back. Now you can also recite it with me." As she spoke, she began to recite the scriptures in a low voice. However, Zhou Qin smiled bitterly and said, "Last time, Zi Yuan helped bring Master back from the spirit space. Who can bring Master back this time?" Su Chan stopped reciting the scriptures and said seriously, "You can't say that. Yundong is now traveling with his yang spirit. Although he is in the realm of forgetting everything, his situation is different from when he was trapped in the spirit space before. Yundong's yang spirit exists in our spirit space. Maybe he will pass by us at any time. If we keep reciting the scriptures, maybe he will hear us." Zhou Qin thought for a moment and sighed. "Well, what you said makes sense." Then she also began to recite the scriptures with Su Chan. However, when Su Chan was reciting the scriptures, her eyes were closed, while Zhou Qin was reciting the scriptures without closing her eyes. She stared at Li Yundong, for fear that he would wake up in the next second. Zhou Qin sighed in her heart. "Master, if your yang spirit exists in this spirit space, then where are you? If you can hear us, then come back quickly. Where is Li Yundong's yang spirit?" I'm afraid that Li Yundong himself can't answer this question. Ever since he had entered the realm of forgetting everything, Li Yundong clearly felt that he was in an absolute, empty world. There was no trace around him, and it was dark. He couldn't see his fingers in front of him. He was floating in the air, with nowhere to borrow strength, like a newborn baby in the chaos. This was not the first time Li Yundong had encountered such a situation, but what was different from before was that this time, Li Yundong clearly felt that his strength was much greater than before. Moreover, as soon as he moved a little, the world around him shook violently, as if an eggshell was troubling him. As soon as he stretched out his hands, the eggshell would break. Li Yundong only struggled a little, and the chaotic and dark world shone brightly. With a crack appeared above his head, as if another world had opened its door to him, and brilliant light fell from the sky. This light fell on the top of Li Yundong's head, and in an instant, his whole body felt warm. Li Yundong looked at the brilliant world above his head and knew that this must be another realm waiting for him. He struggled with all his might and jumped out of this primitive chaotic world. This jump was like a baby being born or a monkey jumping on a rock. Li Yundong suddenly jumped into this bright world. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in the land of the boundless world. Above his head was a majestic blue sky with pure white clouds. The sun seemed to have a pair of dark eyes looking at him. Below his feet was a vast land, a steel city, endless streams of horses and carriages, and countless mortals wriggling under his feet like a colony of ants. At this moment, Li Yundong suddenly understood. In an instant, he understood what the Taoist Taishu Wuji was and what the Buddhist Eight Great Freedom Heavens was. And at this moment, no one in the world knew that the moment Li Yundong was about to enter the indestructible Jinshan, he was the first to understand the mystery of Buddhism and Taoism. Since the end of the Ming dynasty and the beginning of the Qing dynasty, since the two great masters of the Wu Lu sect, Wu Shouyang and Lu Huayang, who were famous for their combination of immortals in Buddhism and Taoism, great cultivators who had comprehended Buddhism and Taoism to the realm of indestructible Jinshan in the past 300 years had come to the world again. Well, sorry, there are a lot of things to do, and it's late. I don't think I can catch up with the second update today. I owe you 2 updates, and I'll make it up in the future. In addition, I encountered a very interesting thing when I returned to Shanghai. Yesterday, when I was waiting for the train at the railway station, I suddenly saw a middle-aged Taoist priest in a white shirt, with bandages on his feet, a black hat and a horsetail whisk in his hand. At that time, I secretly took a photo and posted it on Weibo. This is not an interesting thing, but this Taoist priest was drinking coke at that time, and next to him was a coquettish mature woman who was dressed in revealing clothes and had a tattoo on her back. Alas, I was shocked at that time. I really can't afford to hurt such a Taoist priest and a cultivator. Chapter 681. Bastard. In the Shangri-La Hotel in Dongwu City, Seonji Tsunekatsu angrily threw the mobile phone in his hand to the ground. The newly launched Apple IV was smashed into countless pieces by him without mercy. In his room, Kaisai Hikariani opened his eyes slightly and said faintly, "Tsunekatsu, what did Buddha teach you? You have to be calm." Seonji Tsunekatsu said angrily, "Great monk, how can I be calm and normal? These cunning Chinese actually used such a despicable and shameless method to deal with us. They are all a bunch of cowards, a bunch of rats." At this time, the door of his and the great monk's room was also pushed open. It was Ise Shingguang of the Ise Shinto, dressed in a Japanese-style men's kimono, with his hands in his sleeves, walking in slowly. Behind him was still the Ksitigarbha goddess Ise Chuyun, and behind her were many cultivators from other sects in Japan. Ise Shingguang glanced at the broken mobile phone parts and couldn't help laughing. "Ah, it seems that you have already gotten the news, Tsunekatsu." Seonji Tsunekatsu was furious, but he did not dare to neglect this middle-aged man who looked a little lazy. He turned around, put his palms together, and said, "Ise Shingguang. Have you all received the news, too?" At this time, cultivators from other sects in Japan poured in, filling the originally spacious and luxurious business room. Ise Shingguang leaned against the window sill, touched his chin, and said with a smile, "Yes, otherwise, why would we all come here? To see your heroic posture of smashing your mobile phone?" Hearing his words, some cultivators from other sects who could not bear to see Seonji Tsunekatsu laughed in a low voice. Seonji Tsunekatsu's face turned red. He gritted his teeth and said, "Are you all here to laugh at me?" Ise Shingguang waved his hand and said, No, Tsunekatsu, don't get excited. Aren't you our vanguard? Now the situation has changed. Jingyi School has changed the date. After discussing our opinions, we want to hear your opinion. Now, should we go or stay? Or should we fight? When Kaisai Hikagi heard this, he immediately opened his eyes and looked at Imagawa Kagumo, who was in the crowd. Imagawa Kagumo nodded slightly at him. Kaisai Hikari calmed down, closed his eyes, and softly chanted the name of Buddha. Seonji Tsunekatsu also quickly glanced at Kaisai Hikariuni, only to see him slightly nod his head with an undetectable movement. He immediately made up his mind and said loudly, "There is no reason to look back when the arrow is out of the bow. Although we are the vanguard group, since we are here, we should not be afraid to fight like those cowardly Chinas. Although we are fewer in number, we should face the difficulties head-on and defeat the China's cultivators with courage and determination." Seonji Tsunekatsu's words were full of vigor. Many cultivators around him nodded secretly. Some even responded loudly, "Tsunekatsu, well said. Tsunekatsu, please continue to lead us. You're right. So what if we have fewer people? Since the Chinese changed the date at the last minute, it means that they're already afraid of us. In a battle between two armies, morale came first. If they admit defeat like this, do we still have to be afraid of them?" As soon as these people spoke, the atmosphere in the room suddenly became hot. Ise Shingguang curled his lips and murmured in a low voice, "What a headache. I knew it would be like this." When Seonji Tsunekatsu saw this, he walked up to him, put his palms together, and bowed. "Shingguang, although I am a nobody and my words have no weight, please, for the sake of our Japanese cultivation world, please work hard to move forward with us, please." Ise Shingguang stared at Seonji Tsunekatsu for a long time. He turned his head to look at Ise Chuyun beside him and sighed silently. He laughed and said, "You're too serious, Tsunekatsu. Our Ise Shinto is also a part of the Japanese cultivation world. Naturally, we will not be willing to fall behind others. Since we are here, we will definitely fight with all our strength and strive to win." Seonji Tsunekatsu was overjoyed when he heard this. For a moment, the Japanese cultivators in the room were also excited and shouting slogans. And at this moment, the room they were in suddenly trembled. The teacups in the room made clanking sounds, and the tea in the cups trembled to the point of ripples. Earthquake? Some cultivators were shocked. Saionji Tsunekatsu frowned and said, "No way. Dongwu City should not be in the earthquake zone." Chuyun, who had a calm temperament, suddenly said, "It's not an earthquake. It's a cultivator who causes heaven and earth to tremble when he is comprehending the Tao." Everyone was shocked. Where could a cultivator be so powerful? How could he cause heaven and earth to tremble? This tremor came and went quickly. Soon, the room calmed down, and all the cultivators in the Japanese cultivation world suddenly felt a shadow in their hearts. Where on earth is this cultivator comprehending the Tao? It seems that this time, their wishful thinking may not be completely realized. In the past, Li Yundong had never understood why cultivators could challenge the power of heaven and thunder. When he had faced the heavenly tribulation, Li Yundong had realized the horror of heavenly thunder for the first time. It was a kind of power that could destroy heaven and earth. You soon. Especially after a cultivator's cultivation reached the sixth heaven of Yuanying, the Yin spirit would appear in the Niden, and then the Yang spirit would be cultivated. When the Yang spirit was cultivated to the highest level, it would really jump out of the cage and no longer be in the five elements. From then on, it would say goodbye to life, old age, illness, and death. Although the body might age, the cultivator's Yang spirit would become stronger and stronger, especially after cultivating to the Jinshin phase. With the condensation of the Jinshin, the cultivator's Yang spirit could almost be said to be immortal. Even if this body was destroyed, the cultivator could find a new body with his Yang spirit and the memory of his previous life, or be reincarnated. This cycle would continue until the end of the world. For cultivators who had cultivated to this level, it was difficult for any magic treasures in the world to kill them. Only the magic circle could break them, and only heavenly thunder could kill them. When encountering heavenly thunder, cultivators couldn't even avoid it. Why would they go there knowing that there was a tiger in the mountain? The jinshi of cultivators came from essence, qi, and blood, and people ate the five elements of heaven and earth and turned them into essence, qi, and blood through the five internal organs. Therefore, the jinshi of cultivators actually came from the five internal organs of the human body and the five elements of heaven and earth, and heavenly thunder was the supreme power above the five elements. When the heavenly thunder from the ninth heaven struck down, the five elements in the body would be broken and the order of the small universe would collapse. It was absolutely an extravagant hope to resist a second time with qi. But it could only block one heavenly thunder, and the second one would be destroyed. What was the point? What was the point of cultivators going through this heavenly tribulation? How could they absorb power from the heavenly tribulation to strengthen themselves? But at this moment, Li Yundong suddenly understood why it was said that cultivators could challenge heavenly thunder after cultivating to the indestructible Jinshin, and why they dared to say that heaven and earth can be destroyed, but I am the only one who is indestructible, when cultivating to this level. At this moment, Li Yundong felt that the strength of his whole body seemed to be drawn by heaven and earth, wanting to spread out in all directions and turn into countless clones. At this time, Li Yundong suddenly remembered the realm of 8 free heavens he had comprehended in the spirit space of the burning thumb pot. Why could Buddhism and Taoism be practiced together? The origin was that whether it was Buddhism or Taoism, it was a process of searching for oneself and one's true self. The great cultivators of Taoism had been called Jinren throughout the dynasties, and the great cultivators were called Great Jinren by those in power. The Jin referred to the true self of seeking the true self, getting rid of the false and retaining the true. There was no immortal body in the world, only an eternal Dharmakaya. And what was unique was that the cultivators of Buddhism also cultivated the true self. The Diamond Sutra said, "There is no self, no human, no living beings, no longevity, but the Dharmakaya." It meant that there was no self in the physical body, no self in others, no self in heaven and earth, and even no self in life and death. Everything in this world is fake. My body, the people around me, the world around me, and even my life and death are all fake and nothingness. Only my true method is eternal and unique. This coincided with the realm of unity of heaven and man, infinite void, advocated by Taoism. Li Yundong had read the cultivation books of the Wuxia sect in the spirit space. He clearly remembered what Lu Huayang had written in the Life's Wisdom Sutra, shattering the void map. A brilliant world surrounded the world, the void was clear, and the heart of heaven shone. The sea was clear and the moon melted in the pool. At that time, Li Yundong didn't understand the meaning of this poem, but at this time, he suddenly realized that cultivators needed to enter the realm of forgetting themselves, so that they could enter the void, which was the chaotic dark world where Li Yundong had been before. In theory, there was no difference between the birth of a cultivator and the birth of an ordinary person. A mortal was born from the mother's womb. To a baby, it was originally a chaotic and dark world. When a mortal kept struggling, it was the time for him to be born. When cultivators had the power to break through this world, they had the opportunity and ability to go to another world. After shattering the void, the realm of forgetting oneself made Li Yundong feel that his body was in the boundless world, and his yang spirit was everywhere, as if it existed in every corner of the world and in every great way. This kind of feeling, this kind of realm were very mysterious, so Lu Huayang wrote a poem to describe this realm. Not born and not destroyed, the clouds are scattered, the mountains are clean, there is no going and no coming, wisdom returns to meditation, the moon is lonely. For Buddhists, what was the great freedom? What was the true self? In the spirit space, Li Yundong clearly understood that the eight great freedom was the great freedom, which was the true self. The ultimate goal of Taoist cultivation was to cultivate one's yang spirit to the point where it could be big or small, near or far, light or heavy, more or less, still or active, infinitely changeable, and immortal. These were the 8 realms of freedom. Why could cultivators resist the heavenly thunder? It was precisely because when the heavenly thunder struck, the yang spirit of cultivators could instantly reach the realm of the 8 great freedom realm, big and small, more and less, gather and disperse. I see, I see. Li Yundong laughed and said, when the heavenly thunder falls, the cultivator's yang spirit will instantly transform into billions of clones. The heavenly thunder can split 1, but it can't split 2. It can split 2, but it can't split 3. Even the final 81 bolts of the strongest heavenly thunder can't strike every place in the world. When cultivating the immortal true self and comprehending the great way, cultivators will cast the brand of the true self and true method in the world. In the future, even if all the yang spirit clones are split apart, they can slowly gather together according to the seed of the true self and true method left by the cultivator in the world and use it as a coordinate to recreate the yang spirit Dharmakaya. What was immortality? The heavenly thunder could not kill, and the divine thunder could not disperse. This was called immortality. What was the immortal Jinshin? Although the Jinshin was broken, the true method still existed. This was the immortal Jinshin. When Li Yundong comprehended this truth, his yang spirit doppelganger had already spread to an infinite realm. Each of his doppelgangers was as small as powder. At this time, he couldn't help but raise his head and laugh. His laughter made heaven and earth tremble, but there was no sound in the secular world. No one heard his laughter. This was the invisible great way, and the loudest sound was silent. But after Li Yundong finished laughing, his heart suddenly moved. He thought to himself, where should I put the brand of the true method and the true self? Should I put them in the sky and shine with the sun and the moon? Or should I put them under the earth and live as long as heaven and earth? Just as Li Yundong was hesitating, he suddenly thought of a beautiful smiling face. A gentle and moving face flashed in front of him, and her voice and smile seemed to be right in front of him. Li Yundong immediately smiled gently and said, yes, of course, it's best to store this brand in Su Chan's body. If she is here, I will be here. If she is not here, then what's the point of living alone in this world? Moreover, Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin are still waiting for me. I'd better go back early. Thinking of this, Li Yundong's mind stirred, and the clones that had spread out began to gather quickly. However, it was easy for him to disperse, but it was very difficult for him to gather back. When Li Yundong slowly gathered his clones, it was already 1,000 years in the human world. Li Yundong felt that he had only been in meditation for a moment, but when he opened his eyes again, he was surprised to find that there was no one in the room. Su Chan, Zhou Qin, and Zi Yuan, who were supposed to protect him, were all gone. Only the Liuhe and Bahuang's sword, which he had given to Zhou Qin for safekeeping, were quietly guarding him. Looking at the empty room, Li Yundong's heart sank, and an ominous thought arose spontaneously, I'll try to update 2 more chapters in the evening. Chapter 682. Oh, Master, hurry up, hurry up. We're not going to make it. On a side peak of Mount Longhu. Yusun, unlike in the past, Zhang Lufang had specially put on the special Taoist robe of the Jingyi school of Mount Longhu. At this time, she was wearing a black robe, with a black and white yin-yang pattern embroidered on the chest. She wore a low black Taoist crown with vertical patterns on her head, a horsetail whisk more than 2 feet long in her other hand, and a pair of light blue cloth shoes with 1,000 layers of soles on her feet. Although the black Taoist robe covered her from head to toe like a straight tube, and no curves could be seen all over her body, making her look too solemn and even a little lethargic, Zhang Liufang's pretty face was smiling, and her beautiful eyes were sparkling, which made people couldn't help but praise her in their hearts. What a beautiful little Taoist nun. Zhang Lufang urged loudly at the front door. Soon, a tall foreigner with blonde hair, blue eyes rushed out of the wing room in the backyard of the Taoist temple. This foreigner was none other than Hardadef, who had been rescued by Zhang Lufang and Zhang Kongyun. Hardadef was wearing a dark blue Taoist robe, and the Taoist crown on his head was crooked. He seemed to be very unused to the cloth shoes on his feet. He walked a little crookedly, and his posture was ridiculous. But even so, he still grabbed the sleeve of an old Taoist priest with one hand and kept shouting, "Master, eldest Shiji is calling you to hurry up. You have to hurry up." Zhang Kongyun was wearing a golden Taoist robe with blue edges. He hadn't even put on his robe yet, and his clothes were disheveled. As he was dragged away by Hardadef, he bulged his eyes and shouted, "Be*****, how can you treat your master like this? Let go of me, let go of me. It's inappropriate for others to see us like this. If you don't let go, I'll kick you out of the door." As soon as Hardadef heard the words, "kick him out," he immediately let go of his hand and knelt down with a thud. He hugged Zhang Kongyun's leg and burst into tears. "Master, don't kick me out. Oh, this fool really cries when he wants to. He's even more troublesome than an Oscar winner." Zhang Kongyun was depressed in his heart. Zhang Kongyun glared at her. "Shut up. If you cry again, I'll really kick you out." Zhang's crying stopped abruptly. He stared at Zhang Kongyun with his eyes wide open, not daring to speak for a moment. Zhang Kongyun also stared at him and muttered to himself, "This guy can be really stupid sometimes, but he's not stupid at this moment." Was this guy really stupid, or was he just pretending to be stupid? The two of them stared at each other for a while. Zhang Kongyun suddenly waved his hand impatiently and shouted, "Get up, get up. I can't walk if you hug my leg like this." Hardadef quickly let go of his hand, grabbed Zhang Kongyun's sleeve, and walked out with all his might. As he walked, he shouted, "Master, let's go. Eldest senior sister is calling you." Zhang Kongyun didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He shouted, "Let go of me. My sleeve is torn by you." At the door, Zhang Lufang saw them, one old and one young, one from a middle school, one from a foreign school, one from a foreign school, one from a native country, one from a foreign country, and the other from a foreign country. The short journey had caused them to spend a lot of time walking and stopping. She couldn't help but laugh so hard that her body shook. Zhang Kongyun was furious when he saw her like this. He was so angry that he glared at her and said, "You be******, girl, the second thing I regret in my life is that I listened to your nonsense and accepted this hateful foreigner as my disciple. Damn it, I'm so angry. Why did I have to be so soft-hearted in the first place?" Ever since they left Mount Longhu, Zhang Kongyun and Zhang Lufang had returned to their Taoist temple, and an endless nightmare had begun. Although Hardadef's body had gradually recovered, his brain was still not working well. The only thing he remembered most clearly was that as soon as he saw Zhang Kongyun, he had cried and shouted that he wanted to be his disciple. The most common action was to hug his thigh and cry loudly. It was fine if he just cried, but the key was that he had rubbed his tears and snot on Zhang Kongyun's leg. Zhang Kongyun was so disgusted that he wanted to burn his clothes and pants. Although Zhang Kongyun was a great cultivator and could easily avoid Hardadef's hug when he wanted to, he still had to eat, right? He had to sleep, right? He had to meditate and cultivate, right? God had pity on him. He was about to reach the immortal Jinshin. Every time he wanted to enter the realm of oneness of heaven and man, he would always meet this shameless guy by his side. He had gone to another mountain to meditate, but this B***starred foreigner had come to find him like a dog. Does a big nose have such an advantage? Is it a dog's nose? It was like a prostitute visiting a brothel. Every time he was about to enter the alley to seek pleasure, the anti-prostitution officers came. Once wasn't enough, but it was the same every single time. Who can be more miserable than me? When Zhang Kongyun thought of this, he burst into bitter tears. He wanted to howl to the sky and cry. In this case, after being harassed by Hardadef to the point that he wanted to die, he finally accepted Zhang Liufang's repeated requests to formally accept Hardadef as his disciple. Soon for this reason, the Zhengyi school even held a large-scale apprenticeship ceremony. But after accepting his disciple, Zhang Kongyun thought that his life would be a little better. Unexpectedly, his nightmare had just begun. Just by participating in a succession ceremony, he had almost been tortured by Hardadef to the point of ascending to heaven and leaving his body. When Zhang Lufang heard Zhang Kongyun's scolding, she couldn't help but ask curiously, "The second thing you regret? Then what is the first thing you regret?" Zhang Kongyun's eyes bulged and he said angrily, "The first thing I regret is taking you as my disciple." Zhang Lufang suddenly said angrily, "Master, how can you say that? What does this have to do with me?" Zhang Kongyun glared at him and said, "If you hadn't saved this foreign devil, there wouldn't have been such a mess today. If you hadn't insisted that I accept him as my disciple, I wouldn't have been in such a mess. Damn it, it's really damn it. Cultivators don't cultivate. Instead, they do all these dirty things. I'm so angry." Zhang Lufang laughed so hard that her whole body was twitching. She rubbed her cheeks hard with one hand and rubbed her stomach with the other. She squatted on the ground and said, "Master, this is your fate. You have to accept it." Zhang Kongyun was so angry that he wanted to beat his chest and stamp his feet. "How can you still gloat? What a wicked disciple." Hardadef didn't say anything. He just looked at them and smiled foolishly, not knowing that all this had happened because of him. Just as the three of them were entangled, two clear voices suddenly came from behind Zhang Lufang. "Shiji Lufang, Shishu Kongyun." Zhang Lufang looked back and saw that it was Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, both dressed in bright yellow Taoist robes. After they came to the Zhengyi school, they had become Zhang Ling's disciples. Zhang Ling had entered the sect earlier than Zhang Kongyun in terms of cultivation, so in terms of seniority, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao called Zhang Kongyun Shishu. However, because Zhang Lufang was of the same generation as Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, she had entered the sect earlier than the two sisters, so they called her Shiji. However, because the two of them held the important position of Sword Soul in the Sanju formation, in order to show their unique strength and status, they were specially allowed to wear the golden Taoist robes with blue edges that only the great cultivators of the Zhengyi school were qualified to wear. Originally, this was not in line with the etiquette of the Zhengyi school, but Zhang Ling had always been protective and domineering. Although her cultivation was not the top master in the Zhengyi school, she was of high seniority and had great prestige. In addition, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were very likable girls, so no one cared about this with them. Although Zhang Lufang was an authentic inner disciple of the Zhengyi school, she was young, so her seniority was also low. It was rare for someone of her age to call her senior sister. Therefore, when she saw the two beautiful sword souls, she was so happy that she beamed with joy. "Ah, it's you guys." Zhang Lufang turned around with a giggle and greeted them warmly. Deng Yu blinked her eyes, looked at Zhang Lufang curiously, and said with a smile, "Shiji Lufang, why are you smiling so happily?" Just as Zhang Lufang was about to open her red lips, she saw Zhang Kongyun immediately glare at her, as if warning her that if she dared to tell anyone about this, she would immediately be expelled from the sect. Zhang Lufang rolled her eyes and said with a smile, "Nothing." "Junior sister Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, what are you doing here?" Deng Jiao was still very reserved and shy, as if it was very difficult for her to say a word or two to a girl of the same age. She looked softly at her sister and motioned for her to speak. Deng Yu did not stand on ceremony. She had always been a chatterbox. Deng Yu said with a smile, "Master asked us to urge you. All the Shishu and Shibua have arrived. You're the only ones left." Zhang Lufang exclaimed, turned her head and shouted at Zhang Kongyun, "Master, it's all your fault. Everyone is here, and only the three of us are left. Let's go." Ever since Deng Yu and Deng Jiao had arrived, Zhang Kongyun had turned around, lest the two little girls see his disheveled appearance. After tidying up for a while, he turned around and said to Deng Yu and Deng Jiao with a serious face, "Well, I see. Thank you for informing us. We'll go now." After that, he glared at Hardadef, then walked forward with his hands clasped behind his back, looking extremely dignified. But when he walked up to Zhang Lufang, he suddenly winked at her and whispered, "Hey, is my hat crooked?" Zhang Lufang took a look and found that Zhang Kongyun's head couldn't be more crooked, just like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. She suddenly burst into laughter, but she quickly restrained her smile and said seriously, "Master, you're very handsome." Zhang Kongyun looked at her suspiciously and supported his head with his hands, so his hat tilted from one side to the other. After struggling for a while, he finally felt relieved. He flicked his sleeves and walked out with a snort. John was engrossed in watching from the side. He also imitated Zhang Kongyun's posture and wore his hat crookedly. Then, he flicked his sleeves and imitated Zhang Kongyun's way of walking and walked outside. When Zhang Kongyun heard the movement behind him, he turned his head and was immediately furious. He pointed at Hardadef and said, "You, don't follow me." Zhang Lufang immediately said angrily, "Master, Hardadef is your disciple. He's also a disciple of our Jingyi school. Why can't he go?" Zhang Kongyun was suddenly speechless. He snorted angrily, flicked his sleeves, and left. Hardadef immediately followed suit. He flicked his sleeves, snorted, and swaggered after him. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, who were watching from the side, wanted to laugh, but they didn't dare to. Their shoulders were trembling. When Zhang Kongyun walked far away, Zhang Lufang grabbed Deng Yu's arm and asked nervously and excitedly, "Hey, how many people came this time? How is it? Isn't it lively?" Deng Yu also became excited. "There are so many people. I've never seen so many cultivators gathered together. It's so lively. Come with us and have a look. Cultivators from many sects have come. I'm afraid there are thousands of people on the field." Zhang Lufang, on the other hand, was eager to see the world in chaos. Her eyes lit up, and she excitedly took Deng Yu and Deng Jiao's hands and ran. As she ran, she asked, "Which sects and people have come? Tell me quickly." Deng Yu counted with his fingers and said seriously, 35 people from the Chuanjin Dragon sect have come, which is the most. 8 people from the Chuanjin Nanhua sect have come, 7 people from the Qingwei sect, and well, it seems that there are more than 20 people from the Jinshan sect. Zhang Liufang's pretty face was shining with excitement. "Are there any handsome men? Have you seen any handsome men?" Deng Yu was overjoyed, as if he had found a kindred spirit. He quickly nodded and said, "Yes, yes. Several of them are quite handsome." Zhang Lufang was also overjoyed. She laughed and said, "Wow, there are handsome men to look at. Hey, by the way, where's Super Lee? Where's your classmate, Super Lee? Is he here? Headache, I can't update the third chapter today. I still owe you 2 chapters. Please rest assured, I will make up for it. Chapter 683. At the mention of Super Lee, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao immediately stopped in their tracks. They were curious and puzzled. At the same time, they looked at Zhang Lufang in surprise and asked, Shiji Lufang, is Li Yundong also coming to the ceremony today? Zhang Lufang also stopped and looked at Deng Yu and Deng Jiao strangely. Don't you know? Li Yundong has a good relationship with Zhenren Ziyuan. There's no reason for him not to come. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked at each other. Deng Yu said, I don't know. We didn't see Li Yundong. A look of disappointment flashed across Zhang Liufang's face. Super Lee didn't come? It's so boring. Then there's nothing to see. Deng Yu blinked her eyes and persuaded, Senior Sister Lufang, maybe he'll be here when we go again? Zhang Liufang's face lit up with joy. Yes, what you said makes sense. Let's hurry up. The 3 of them chattered all the way and ran quickly. It didn't take long for them to arrive at a Taoist temple on a side peak of Mount Longhu. The scale of this Taoist temple was not very large, and its outer wall was only about 1 meter high. It had white walls and black tiles, and there were 4 huge silk paintings hanging on the wall. These paintings were of the 4 great divine beasts, azure dragon, vermilion bird, white tiger, and black tortoise. At the entrance of the Taoist temple, there were 4 statues of gods in golden armor. They were majestic, as if they had descended from the sky and were lifelike. After Zhang Lufang, Deng Yu, and Deng Jiao arrived, they stopped talking and followed Zhang Kongyun obediently, but they couldn't help looking around curiously. In order to welcome the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect, the Zhengyi school had specially sealed the mountain early. In order to prevent some tourists from entering by mistake from disturbing the ceremony, they had chosen a relatively remote Taoist temple on a side peak. Fortunately, Mount Longhu was a Taoist holy land, and there were Taoist temples everywhere. Although the arrangement of the Zhengyi school was sudden, it did not affect the ceremony. After Zhang Lufang and the others entered the gate of the Taoist temple, they suddenly saw a vast expanse of flat ground in the Taoist temple. The field was paved with green bricks. On the east side of the field was a rather majestic Taoist temple pavilion. Inside the pavilion were worshipped Heavenly Primogenitor Lingbao, and Heavenly Primogenitor Daoda. Outside the pavilion was a statue of Celestial Master Zhang. In front of the statue was a huge bronze tripod. Inside the tripod was an incense stick as thick as a person's forearm. When the incense stick was lit in the field, green smoke curled up in spirals. However, it magically gathered and did not disperse. You almost there. After Zhang Lufang followed Zhang Kongyun to the field, she looked around curiously. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao saw that Zhang Ling, Zhou Ping, and the others were busy socializing with people from other sects and didn't have a chance to talk to them. They stayed in front of Zhang Lufang and asked curiously in a low voice, Shiji Lufang, are there so many cultivators in our country? I really didn't know before. Zhang Lufang said with a smile, of course. Although it's the age of chaos now, the country has been relatively lax in recent years, so the number of people has slowly increased. Moreover, only the senior masters and the best of the younger generation from each sect have come. They are all 1 in 100 figures. It's a pity that you didn't go to the Taoist assembly last time. If you had, you would have seen more young masters. This time, there are more seniors from various sections. TSK, I didn't see any handsome guys. It's boring. Deng Yu asked curiously, are there many young masters at the Taoist assembly? Zhang Lufang looked around and replied, of course, this is a meeting specially set up for the masters of the younger generation in the cultivation world to make a name for themselves. Deng Yu asked curiously, is there anyone among the young masters who is more powerful than Li Jiandong? Zhang Lufang laughed and said, if they are more powerful than Super Li, can Super Li still be considered invincible? Of course they are not as powerful as him. Although Deng Yu already knew these things, when she heard others praise her former classmate and her savior, she was overjoyed, as if others were praising her. She thought of the prestige of Super Li, and couldn't help but think of his mighty figure at the Taoist assembly. She couldn't help but be fascinated. It's a pity that he didn't come. If only he had come. It's said that he is an invincible master. I really want to see how invincible he is. Her sister, Deng Jiao, was shy and had not spoken, but when she heard this, her eyes couldn't help lighting up. She was in a trance, as if she couldn't wait to go back to the day of the Taoist assembly and see Li Jiandong's divine power. Zhang Lufang also sighed. After looking around, she pursed her lips and said, it's boring. I've seen all the handsome guys who came. They are nothing more than Yu Sheng and the others from the Chuanjin Dragon sect. It's boring. As she spoke, she heard a voice coming from the side. Hey, you guys are praising Li Jiandong like a flower. Is it necessary? When Zhang Lufang, Deng Yu, and Deng Jiao heard this voice, they turned their heads and saw a woman wearing a short red robe with a long blue gown inside, and a short black Taoist crown on her head looking at them with an unconvinced expression. Zhang Lufang could tell at a glance that the woman in front of her was dressed in the Taoist robe of the Maoshan sect, and this pretty woman was Mao Yuchang, the daughter of the leader of the Maoshan sect. Because of the mystical silver fox, the Taoism of the north and the south of China had once led to a 10-year war. This war had swept through China's Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, from the royal family to the common people. No one had been spared. Although 1,000 years had passed, and the Taoism of the north and the south were no longer as incompatible as before, the gap still existed. As the only northern force among the three mountains of Taoism, the Maoshan sect naturally assumed the role of the mainstay of the Taoism of the north of China, resisting the continuous invasion of the southern Taoism forces led by the Zhuni sect. It was precisely because of the uneven distribution of the Taoist forces in the north and the south that the forces in the north were weaker than those in the south. Therefore, the Taoist sects in the north had always been on the defensive in a very low-key manner. Whether it was the siege of Mount Tianlong, the Taoist assembly, or the pill-seizing battle on Mount Gazao and Tiandu Peak, they had not sent anyone to participate. Even the cultivators of their sects had rarely been involved in the world. Therefore, Mao Yuchang, who had been strictly controlled by her father and almost never walked in the secular world, had only heard of Li Yundong's name, but had never seen him. In addition, she was also a talented cultivator of the younger generation, and her conceit was no less than that of Zi Yuan. Naturally, she was not convinced by Li Yundong. Zhang Lufang looked at Mao Yuchang and saw that the daughter of the leader of the Maoshan sect was born with a face as beautiful as a flower and as beautiful as the moon. She was even prettier than herself, which attracted the attention of many young cultivators in the sect. She secretly pouted and said indifferently, so it's a fellow Taoist of Maoshan sect. Sorry for not recognizing you. Seeing that Zhang Lufang didn't like her, Mao Yuchang was also extremely proud. She snorted and said, if he is really invincible, Li, why didn't he come? Didn't they say that he has a good relationship with Zi Yuan? As far as I know, during the succession ceremony, there will be a battle competition to see if the new sect leader has the qualifications to take over the position of sect leader. If I remember correctly, it seems that you can invite people to help you out. What? He didn't even come to such an open and above-board event. How dare he call himself invincible? Could it be that he's afraid? Zhang Lufang snorted and turned her head away. Whether he's invincible or not, you'll know after you fight with him. Don't blame me for not reminding you, he is now a Jinshin master. Mao Yuchang curled her lips and said, what's so great about a Jinshin master? I can still win. I'm afraid that he won't come. Hearing her exaggeration, Zhang Lufang couldn't help but be shocked. She turned her head to look at her carefully and thought to herself, no way, Mao Yuchang has also reached the Jinshin phase? It doesn't look like it. While she was wondering, she heard a man's voice coming from the side. Yu Chang. What are you saying? Don't be presumptuous. Zhang Lufang looked over and saw a middle-aged man coming to Mao Yuchang and shouting at her in a low voice. Then the middle-aged man turned his head and smiled at Zhang Lufang. He saluted and said, "My niece is a little naughty and arrogant. Please don't mind her, Zhenren Zhang." Before Zhang Lufang could say anything, Zhang Kongyun said to the middle-aged man with a smile, "It turns out to be Zhenren Su Yangzi. Why didn't your leader, Zhenren Buzhou, come?" Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were curious, so they whispered to Zhang Lufang, "Who is this Su Yangzi? Who is Zhenren Buzhou?" Zhang Lufang also whispered, "Su Yangzi is the elder brother of the leader of Maoshan sect. His name is Mao Jian, and Zhenren Buzhou is the leader of the Maoshan sect." Only now did Deng Yu and Deng Jiao realize what was going on. They turned to look at Su Yangzi and listened to their conversation. Su Yangzi smiled and said to Zhang Kongyun, "Our leader is in closed-door cultivation and can't get away, so I had to come on his behalf." Zhang Liufang's heart skipped a beat, and she immediately looked at the scene. She exclaimed and thought to herself, "It's strange. Why haven't the leaders of the other sects come? It's so strange. Hey, the leader of the Qinqing sect is here, but apart from him, none of the leaders of the other sects are here. This is too strange, isn't it?" Zhang Kongyun didn't know what she was thinking. He smiled and returned the salute to Su Yangzi, saying, "I see. When we go back, please say hello to Zhenren Buzhou." After exchanging some pleasantries with him, Su Yangzi glared at Mao Yuchang, then pulled her aside and scolded her in a low voice. "What did I tell you before we came out? Is that something you can say just now? There are so many cultivation seniors and heroic experts here. Do you think it's your turn to be so arrogant?" Mao Yuchang was not surprised. She pursed her lips and said, "Really? But why haven't I seen any experts come? The strongest is only at the intermediate level of the golden body. What the hell? I thought I could see a great master of lightning retribution. What a disappointment. Humph, I wanted to meet Li Yunyang, but he didn't even dare to come. I hate him." Su Yangzi glared at her, but Mao Yuchang seemed to be used to it and was not afraid at all. He could only shake his head helplessly and say, "You really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Forget it, I don't care about you. You'll know after you suffer a few losses." Mao Yuchang giggled and said, "The person who can make me suffer a loss hasn't been born yet." Not far away, Zhang Lufang looked at Mao Yuchang and whispered to Zhang Kongyun, "Master, is this Mao Yuchang a Jinshan master? Why don't I think so? If she's not a Jinshan master, how could she be so arrogant?" Zhang Kongyun glanced at Mao Yuchang and smiled. "She's young and impetuous. It's understandable. Besides, is it strange that the daughter of the leader of the Maoshan sect is a Jinshan master?" Zhang Lufang asked curiously, "Aren't there only 4 Dun Jindan in the past 200 or 300 years? How did she cultivate to the Jinshan phase?" Zhang Kongyun laughed and said, "As the mainstay of the northern forces, the Maoshan sect has been competing with our southern Taoist sects for so many years, so its foundation is naturally very deep. Moreover, which sect doesn't have a special way to cultivate the Jinshan? Didn't Wang Yuanshan also break through to the Jinshan? Didn't I also break through to the Jinshan? No Dun Jindan? Throw it with money. Throw it with medicine. With the unique cultivation method and financial resources of the Maoshan sect, you think you can't make a Jinshan master? Do you believe it?" As he said this, Zhang Kongyun stroked his beard and narrowed his eyes at Mao Yuchang. However, not everyone can rely on money and medicine to reach the Jinshan phase. It's impossible without rare talent. Otherwise, why didn't Wang Jinyuan of Mount Gazao use money and medicine to make himself a Jinshan? No matter what, since Mao Yuchang dared to be so arrogant, she must have something up her sleeve. Zhang Lufang snorted. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly saw 2 people slowly walking over. One of them was wearing a red Taoist robe with blue edges. The Taoist robe was inlaid with an azure dragon bearing its fangs and brandishing its claws. The other was wearing a bright yellow Taoist robe with blue edges. The Taoist robe was inlaid with a majestic vermilion bird. These two people were none other than Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling. Chapter 684. As soon as Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling entered, all the voices on the scene immediately quieted down. Everyone stared at the two of them with bright eyes. Zi Yuan had been famous for a long time, and she was also a peerless beauty. Therefore, her name was really known by everyone in the cultivation world. When everyone saw her and Wan Hongling come out, they immediately held their breath. Not to mention Zi Yuan, the shimmy behind her, who was wearing a vermilion bird robe, was an extremely rare beauty. She had red lips, white teeth, and beautiful eyes. Although she was wearing a Taoist robe, she was still pleasing to the eye. Even without Zi Yuan's existence, Wan Hongling was like a bright star in the cultivation world, which was dominated by men, shining brightly. But if Wan Hongling was a shining star, then Zi Yuan was a bright moon. Zi Yuan's figure was quite slender. At this time, she was wearing a Taoist robe. Although it didn't highlight her exquisite figure, it made her even more tall and slender. Especially when she was wearing this beautiful red Taoist robe, it was really extraordinary. Not only was it full of majesty, but it was also elegant. Although she was walking in front of everyone, everyone felt that this woman seemed to be walking in the clouds of the sky, out of reach. It was not the first time that Zhang Lufang had seen Zi Yuan, but it was the first time that she had seen Zi Yuan wearing such a formal Taoist robe. She couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice, "Wow, Zhenren, Zi Yuan is so beautiful." Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were also stunned. They stared at Zi Yuan in a daze. Deng Yu murmured subconsciously, "Oh my God, how can there be such a beautiful woman in this world?" After all, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were only young girls in their teens or 20s. It was natural for them to love beauty. After wearing this straight Taoist robe, they had some complaints and dissatisfaction in their hearts. However, they saw that Zi Yuan was also wearing a straight Taoist robe, but when she wore it, there was a kind of soul-stirring beauty. It was like a flowing picture scroll. Wherever she went, the picture scroll would stretch out, and she would always be the center of attention in everyone's eyes. Even women were like this, let alone men. Even though cultivators were indifferent to fame and fortune and had a pure heart and few desires, when faced with such a peerless beauty, no matter how firm one's heart was, they could not help but be shaken a little. Some of the weaker ones were even tongue-tied. But this kind of desire did not involve the slightest bit of lust. Even the most excessive one was thinking silently in his heart, "Such a woman, what kind of great spiritual master in the world is worthy of her and can become her Tao companion? If I could become Tao companions with her, I would be willing to do anything for her in my next life." Under everyone's gaze, Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling slowly walked into the field. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. After a long time, Zi Yuan raised her horsetail whisk, bowed to everyone in a Taoist salute, and said, "Amitabha. Greetings, fellow Taoists." At this time, the cultivators present came back to their senses and bowed to Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling. The scene of cultivators from various sects chatting with each other suddenly disappeared. Everyone returned to their respective sections. The cultivators of the Zhengyi school also entered the field one after another and stood opposite Zi Yuan. Among these cultivators, there were yellow robes, blue robes, and purple robes. Among them, Zhang Ling was wearing a purple Taoist robe. In the Zhengyi school, only the leader of the sect could wear a red Taoist robe. Purple robes were worn by direct descendants of extremely high seniority like Zhang Ling. Yellow robes were worn by cultivators with extremely high cultivation quotients or special status, and blue robes were worn by cultivators with low cultivation quotients and low levels. Celestial Master Zhang of the Zhengyi school was cultivating in seclusion, so this time the inauguration ceremony was presided over by Zhang Ling. Coincidentally, except for Zhang Tongtian of the Qingqing sect, none of the other leaders of the various sects had come. This made many cultivators secretly sigh for the Linggong sect and Ziyuan. In the past, the Linggong sect was also a famous sect. In the Song, Yuan and Ming dynasties, it was also a sect that had been given the title of Great Jinren by the emperor. Unexpectedly, it had declined to such a point today. There were only 2 disciples in the sect, and both of them were women. Only the leader of the sect had come to attend the inauguration ceremony. No one would believe it if they told others about it. The world was cold, and with the passage of time, there was really no sect more miserable than the Linggong sect. For a moment, the cultivators of all sects present began to whisper to each other, and there was a little more sympathy in their eyes when they looked at Ziyuan. However, Ziyuan seemed to be unaware of it. Her face was as calm as a calm lake, so no one could tell what she was thinking at this time. However, Wan Hongling, who was next to her, was full of stubbornness and indignation. Zhang Lufang looked at the scene and sighed in a low voice, alas, Jinren Ziyuan was really born at the wrong time. If she had been born 300 years earlier, I'm afraid she would have been a fairy who would go down in history like He Xiangu. But now, I hope she can succeed in taking over smoothly. After all, it is a sect that has been passed down for nearly 1,000 years. Zhang Kongyun suddenly sneered and said, "Do you want her to succeed?" Zhang Lufang asked curiously, "Why not? We are all from the same sect. Why don't you want her to succeed?" Zhang Kongyun shook his head and said, "If Ziyuan succeeds, it will be a disaster rather than a blessing. The disadvantages outweigh the advantages." Zhang Lufang asked in surprise, "Master, what do you mean? Do you want this sect to disappear from now on?" Zhang Kongyun looked back at Zhang Lufang, sighed, shook his head, and said, "Forget it. You don't understand. It's better not to understand in the future." As he spoke, he looked at Ziyuan with pity and whispered in his heart, "Ziyuan, if you are really smart, don't take over the position of leader. This is a big fire pit." While he was sighing in a low voice, Zhang Ling walked out of the field. She walked to the center of the field according to the rules of the Linggong sect and loudly announced the official start of the ceremony. Soon, the disciples of the Zhengyi school filed into the field with incense burners, horsetail whisks, treasured mirrors, and other Taoist magical items. For a moment, the field seemed solemn. After Zhang Ling waited for them to stand, she took out a scroll from the sleeve of her Taoist robe, slowly unfolded it, and read it aloud. She was talking about the etiquette of the Zhengyi school that had been passed down for thousands of years. After reading this long speech, Zhang Ling put away the scroll and looked at Ziyuan with a serious face. She said loudly, "Ziyuan, are you confident that the code of the Linggong sect will continue to be passed down to the world from generation to generation?" Ziyuan chanted the Taoist name, Amitba, "I am confident." Zhang Ling immediately asked again, "Do you have a firm Taoist heart, bravely advance on the road of cultivation, subdue demons, and support the right way?" As soon as this question came out, Ziyuan immediately hesitated. In her opinion, there was a very deep ambiguity in this sentence, but she could not refute it. Moreover, Zhang Ling had asked this question according to the rules of the ceremony, so it was not rude. Ziyuan only hesitated for a moment, then quickly said, "That must be the case." Zhang Ling nodded and said, "Well, according to the rules, please show me the jade plate of the sect." It was obvious that Ziyuan had come prepared. She took out a palm-sized jade plate from her sleeve and held it up respectfully with both hands. This jade plate didn't look big, but it was made of the best jade. The surface of the plate was inlaid with golden characters, which were the names of the past leaders of the Linggong sect of the Zhengyi school. Zhang Ling winked at a Taoist priest in a blue robe beside her. The Taoist priest immediately stepped forward and respectfully took the jade plate with both hands. Then, he raised it high and showed it to the cultivators of the various sects on the field. Then, he began to read the names on it aloud. When he read the name of Wang Yuanshan, the leader of the 42nd generation, he suddenly stopped and handed the jade plate to Zhang Ling. Zhang Ling still didn't take it. Soon, a pretty little Taoist nun came out, took the jade plate, and stood to the side. Zhang Ling nodded and said, "The jade plate is confirmed. Please show me the powerful magical weapon of the sect, Ziyuan." As soon as she said this, the expression of Ruan Hongling, who was standing next to Ziyuan, suddenly changed slightly. She looked at Ziyuan worriedly, but soon lowered her head, not daring to let the crowd see her panicked expression. However, Ziyuan's expression didn't change. She slowly took out a mirror from her sleeve. It was the sky-reaching glazed mirror and handed it over. Another young Taoist priest immediately appeared beside Zhang Ling. He took the sky-reaching glazed mirror from Ziyuan's hand and took a look at it. He was shocked and cried out involuntarily, "This powerful magical weapon has been destroyed." His exclamation immediately caused the cultivators of all sects to stand up and look at the celestial glazed mirror in the man's hand. They saw that the celestial glazed mirror in the Taoist's hand was full of cracks, and they all gasped in shock. Zhang Ling looked angry and shouted, "Ziyuan, how could you destroy such a precious treasure like the sky-reaching glazed mirror?" Ziyuan was expressionless and didn't say a word. Seeing that she was silent, Zhang Ling shouted angrily, "Go on. Where are the other two of the three treasures of the sect?" After that, Ziyuan took out a purple gold jade plate from her sleeve. With the previous experience, the Taoist priest who took the jade plate was not as surprised as before. He only glanced at the jade plate, then helplessly raised it high and said loudly, "The purple gold luo jade plate has also been damaged." This time, many people couldn't help but exclaim. The purple gold luo jade plate and the sky-reaching glazed mirror were both first-class powerful magical weapons. Even if ordinary cultivators wanted to destroy these two powerful magical weapons, it would be as difficult as ascending to heaven. How could Ziyuan destroy two of them at once? This was too exaggerated, wasn't it? Zhang Ling shouted angrily, "Two of the three great treasures have been destroyed. Ziyuan, how are you going to explain this?" Ziyuan's eyes were lowered, and she was still silent. Zhang Ling said angrily, "Where is the Bahuang and Liuhe?" This time, Ziyuan didn't take out anything from her sleeve. She said lightly, "It's not in my hands." This time, there was an uproar. Two of the three treasures of the Linggong sect had been destroyed by Ziyuan, and the other one was not in her hands. This was too absurd, wasn't it? Zhang Ling laughed angrily and said, well, you don't have any of the three great treasures of the sect. Do you want to take over the position of the leader? This is the biggest absurdity in the world." Zhang Lufang, who had been watching Ziyuan nervously from the sidelines, felt her heart skip a beat. She couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice, "Oh no! Jinren Ziyuan is in trouble. Not only will she not be able to inherit the position of the leader, but she will also be punished." Zhang Kongyun didn't expect that Ziyuan would destroy the remaining two great treasures of the Linggong sect. He looked at Ziyuan with his mouth agape and tongue tied. After a long time, he sighed deeply and said in an imperceptible tone, "Yuan Shan, it seems that your disciple's tribulation is going to be difficult. I also want to make up for it, but there are too many trivial things. I have the heart to kill the thief, but I can't do anything about it. I'm so depressed. I don't have to wait any more today. The third one won't come out." Chapter 685. There were precedents of cultivators borrowing powerful magical weapons from each other, so it was normal to lose one or two powerful magical weapons, especially the Bahuang and Liuhe. 10 years ago, Wang Yuanshan had split the Bahuang and Liuhe into two swords, one for his shimi, Yan Fang, and the other for Ao Wushuang. Therefore, if Ziyuan had only lost the Bahuang and Liuhe sword, it would have been understandable. But now, two of the three major treasures of the Linggong sect had been destroyed, and the last one was simply in the hands of others. This kind of thing was simply unimaginable in other sections. For a moment, there was a lot of discussion. Although the cultivators from various sects had only come to be witnesses, there were also many people who pointed at Ziyuan and secretly shook their heads. Mao Yuchang of the Mao Shan sect was proud and arrogant. She had long been dissatisfied with Zi Yuan's reputation. She thought that she was just a figurehead and had the idea of competing with her. However, she was usually very strict with her father, so she didn't have a chance. But this time, she had begged her father for a long time before she was allowed to come with her uncle. But today, she was shocked by Zi Yuan's amazing beauty. At this time, seeing Zi Yuan being silently criticized by everyone, she immediately sneered and said, "You can't even control the powerful magical weapon of the sect, and you still want to be the leader? What a joke." Her sneer was neither loud nor soft, but it was loud enough for many cultivators to hear. Many of them looked at her. Su Yangzi immediately glared at her. "Yuchang, shut up." Mao Yuchang snorted and turned her head away, not saying another word. At this time, Zhang Ling glared at Zi Yuan. "Zi Yuan, do you have anything to say?" Zi Yuan was silent for a while, then opened her red lips and said, "Zi Yuan has nothing to say." Zhang Ling walked up to the glass mirror of sky and pointed at the magic treasure that made countless cultivators jealous. She said angrily, "How did you destroy this glass mirror of sky? Tell me." Zi Yuan lowered her eyes and said in a faint voice, "Since it's already damaged, what's done can't be undone. What's the point of asking?" Zhang Ling was furious. "Bastard. This magic treasure was not only created by Guifei, the Grand Master of the Linggong sect, but it had been passed down for nearly 1,000 years. Today, it was actually destroyed by your hands. How are you going to face your master? How are you going to face the ancestors of Lingbao's sect?" Zi Yuan kept her mouth shut and did not say anything. "You almost there." Seeing that she did not speak, Zhang Ling continued to shout, "Do you think you can keep quiet?" She then turned to the blue-robed Taoist priests behind her and barked, "Tell her what punishment she deserves for destroying the sect's magic treasure." A Taoist priest came forward and looked at Zi Yuan sympathetically. He coughed dryly and said loudly, "Grounded, face the wall for 10 years. When these words were spoken, everyone was shocked. Facing the wall for 10 years was a nice way to put it, but in reality, it was imprisonment for 10 years. None of them dared to imagine that a beauty like Zi Yuan would be imprisoned alone for 10 years, accompanied by a lamp and sleeping alone with a lonely shadow. What kind of consequences would that be? What kind of scene would that be? Ruan Hongling's whole body trembled. She suddenly raised her head and looked at Zi Yuan with her eyes wide open. Her eyes were full of fear and unwillingness. Zhang Ling fiercely turned her head and shouted angrily at the Taoist, "Bastard, this is the punishment for destroying a magic treasure. What if you destroy 2 of them?" Zi Yuan's beauty was devastatingly beautiful, especially her extraordinary temperament, which made people admire her. As the saying goes, a graceful lady is a gentleman's dream. Almost all the young male cultivators present admired her, and this Taoist priest was no exception. He wanted to get away with it, but he didn't expect to be pointed out by Zhang Ling. He immediately blushed with shame and said, strip off her robe and she will be grounded for the rest of her life." Zhang Ling stared at Zi Yuan coldly. "What about the powerful magic treasure of the sect?" The Taoist priest's face changed, and he said with difficulty, destroy her cultivation quotient and expel her from the sect." There was a sudden commotion among the crowd. They all stared at Zi Yuan with their eyes wide open, and their hearts were extremely shocked. For a cultivator, being expelled from the sect was not terrible, but if their cultivation quotient was destroyed and then expelled, it would be too terrible. This was equivalent to kicking them from the top of the world to the bottom of the mud. It was true that cultivators had all kinds of restrictions in the mortal world, and they were even subject to the power of the government. However, they were different from those officials. No matter how strong anyone was, their power would eventually decline one day, and there would be a day when they would die of old age. However, they had the opportunity to ascend and become immortals and go to a world that these powerful people could never go to. But if a cultivator's cultivation quotient was destroyed, it was equivalent to depriving them of their cultivation life and all their strength. This was more cruel than killing them and destroying their bodies. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were also stunned. Although they didn't know that Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling were also one of their lifesavers, Zi Yuan's amazing beauty and ethereal beauty made them admire her very much. However, they saw that their master, who usually treated them kindly and took care of them, was so ruthless and cruel to Zi Yuan. Zhang Lufang also looked at Zhang Ling with her mouth agape. She suddenly turned her head and said to Zhang Kongyun, "Master, is Uncle Master going to kill Zhenren Zi Yuan?" Zhang Kongyun took a deep look at his precious disciple. He sighed heavily in his heart and thought to himself, "Silly disciple, how can you understand these schemes?" Zhang Lufang saw that her master was looking at her but did not speak. She couldn't help but say anxiously, "Master, say something. Uncle Master is not usually such a person. Why is he so vicious now?" Zhang Kongyun sighed and shook his head. "Don't worry about this. This is Master's business." Zhang Lufang was about to speak, but Hardadef, who had been quietly following Zhang Kongyun, suddenly said loudly, "I know her. She's a good person. She's a friend of my master." Hardadef's shout immediately attracted the attention of everyone present. Hardadef was wearing a Taoist robe and a Taoist hat. There were more than 1,000 cultivators present. Although he had a big nose and deep eye sockets, no one noticed him. But at this time, Hardadef's shout immediately attracted many cultivators to point at him curiously and talk about him. Although the cultivation world was now in the Dharma-ending era, every sect was unwilling to let their power weaken. They were constantly trying to expand their influence. Zhenren Zhang Jishuan had taken the initiative to accept disciples in Hainan. He had announced to the public that he would accept disciples regardless of gender, age, race, religion, or even nationality. As long as the other party had a heart for the Tao and a heart of kindness, he would accept them as his disciple. It was also because of this situation that all the sects had slowly begun to accept some foreign people. However, there were also many sects that stubbornly stuck to the rules of their sects, and Jingyi school was one of them. Because of Hardadef, there had once been a fierce debate in Jingyi school. Although Zhang Ling was overbearing and protective, she had a long-term vision. It was precisely because of her strong opposition that Zhang Kongyun had finally accepted Hardadef as his foreign disciple. It was also because of this that Hardadef's shout at this time made the cultivators of Jingyi school feel a chill down their spines. The cultivators, who had originally had a lot of opinions about Zhang Ling and Zhang Kongyun accepting this foreign disciple, immediately glared at Zhang Ling and Zhang Kongyun angrily. Zhang Ling was even more furious. She glared at Zhang Kongyun fiercely, as if to say, "Why can't you even discipline a disciple? Don't you know what kind of occasion this is?" Zhang Kongyun suddenly felt a headache coming on. Even though he was a great cultivator with great cultivation, he broke out in a cold sweat at this time. What made him complain the most was that Hardadef had said, "She is my master's friend." This had really caused him to suffer. Zhang Kongyun didn't know that the master Hardadef was talking about was actually Li Jiandong, but no one present knew this. They thought that Zhang Kongyun and Zi Yuan had secretly communicated with each other. Zhang Kongyun quickly stood up and saluted to the crowd. "Everyone, my disciple is a little confused, and his words are a little muddled. Don't believe him. I'm just a fellow disciple of Zhenren Zi Yuan, and we don't have any personal relationship." How could the crowd believe him? Mao Yuchang sneered and said, "It turns out that the Jingyi school is so desperate to accept disciples. They even accepted such a fool as their disciple. I admire them. Sure enough, they have a way." The northern Taoist sects had always been at odds with the southern Taoist sects, and the southern Taoist sects were not monolithic. The major sects fought openly and secretly, and the disputes were endless. Mao Yuchang's words immediately caused the cultivators of the other sects to snicker. Su Yangzi looked at his precious niece and felt a headache coming on. He grabbed Mao Yuchang and said angrily in a low voice, "If you continue, I'll send you back immediately." Mao Yuchang's father had been in seclusion all year round. She had been brought up by her uncle since she was a child, so she had long been immune to his tricks. She chuckled and closed her mouth, but her eyes kept rolling. Mao Yuchang's sarcasm made the cultivators of the Zhenyi school feel a little embarrassed. Zhang Ling glared at Zhang Kongyun angrily and shouted, "Chonglingzi, how do you discipline your disciple?" Although Zhang Kongyun's cultivation was much higher than Zhang Ling's, he didn't dare to refute the elder Shiji's shout in public. He lowered his head honestly and said, "Elder Shiji, I didn't discipline my disciple well. Please forgive me." After that, he turned around and glared at Zhang Lufang angrily. Zhang Lufang was also startled by her master's glare. She quickly grabbed Hardadef and glared at him. "What nonsense are you talking about? How is master a friend of Jinren Ziyuan?" Hardadef looked around blankly. Suddenly, he hugged his head and cried, "Ah, my head hurts so much." Zhang Kongyun hurriedly shouted at Zhang Lufang in a low voice, "You wicked girl, take him back." How could Zhang Lufang be willing to leave? She answered, but she stretched out her hand and patted Hardadef on the back twice, trying to help him flatten his chest. Her touch just happened to land on Hardadef's Lingtai acupoint. Hardadef let out a cry and immediately stopped screaming. His injuries had almost recovered, and there was only one chi knot left in his body that had not been opened. However, he had been pestering Zhang Kongyun these days, so Zhang Kongyun had no time to avoid him. How could he be in the mood to give him chi to heal his spirit? Zhang Lufang had accidentally unlocked the last chi knot in Hardadef's body. The memories that had been locked away in his mind flooded out with a hum. He was tongue-tied and stared blankly in front of him. His memories of the past and his experiences after coming to the country flashed before his eyes like a movie. Zhang Lufang waved her hand in front of his eyes, pushed him, and shouted, "Hey, big nose, are you okay?" Only then did Hardadef suddenly come to his senses. He looked around with a complicated look in his eyes, and soon returned to his usual silly smile. He smiled foolishly and said, "I'm fine, Shiji, I'm fine." Zhang Lufang didn't know about Hardadef's change. She looked at him strangely and said in a low voice, "Hey, this is not the sect. Don't talk nonsense. Otherwise, I won't be able to save you if you go back and suffer." Hardadef smiled foolishly and didn't say anything more, but his eyes were less silly and more clear as he looked at the scene. Chapter 686. Seeing that Hardadef had finally calmed down, Zhang Lufang breathed a sigh of relief. She saw that everyone was looking at Ziyuan again. Only her master was glaring at her angrily. She quickly changed the topic with a smile. "Master, why is Uncle Master so cruel to Ziyuan? Uncle Master is not usually such a person." How could Zhang Kongyun not know what she was thinking? But now was not the time to settle accounts. He snorted angrily and said in a low voice, "Factional strife, power struggle, what do you, a child, know? In the face of such factional strife, whoever is a good person is a sinner. Do you think I don't want to help Ziyuan? But why don't I? Think about it yourself." Zhang Lufang pouted. "Humph, I'm not a child. I'm already very old. Is factional strife so terrible? Can it make a person become another person?" Zhang Kongyun sneered and said, "Where there are people, there will be Jianghu, and where there is Jianghu, there will be strife. Do you think that even the high and mighty sect master Celestial Master would never engage in such scheming? Humph, what a joke. Anyway, don't talk too much about this matter. Uncle Master is doing this for the foundation of our Zhenyi school for more than 1,000 years. She has her reasons." Zhang Lufang snorted. "What reasons? It's nothing more than a struggle for power and profit. Do you think I don't know anything? I just don't understand. We are all from the same sect. Why are there such strife?" Zhang Kongyun was silent. He suddenly thought of his best friend Wang Yuanshan. His voice became a little bleak as he whispered, "Silly child, you are too young to understand." While they were talking, Zhang Ling once again made things difficult for Ziyuan. She shouted, "Ziyuan, would you rather have your cultivation crippled and be expelled from the sect than explain yourself? Zi Yuan's long eyelashes fluttered slightly. She slowly raised her eyes, glanced at Zhang Ling, and then at everyone present, and then at Zhang Ling Yusun. Everyone held their breath and listened to what Zi Yuan was going to say next, waiting for her explanation. But Zi Yuan just smiled gently and said lightly, even if I explain, what's the use? As soon as she said this, Wan Hongling suddenly grabbed her arm and whispered anxiously, Shiji. Zi Yuan didn't seem to feel it. She secretly transmitted her voice to Wan Hongling, Hongling, pay attention to your actions. Have you forgotten what I told you before we came? Wan Hongling felt as if she had been struck by lightning. You almost there when the golden invitation from the Zhini school was delivered, it was like a rope around her neck. She could only watch as the rope tightened. However, when the Zhini school quickly sent another golden invitation and changed the time of the ceremony, Wan Hongling suddenly felt that a terrible danger was quickly approaching them. Because of this, she immediately rushed to Zi Yuan's side and told her about the predicament at this time. She asked her to quickly think of a way to get Li Yundong ready and help them get through this difficulty. But what they had never expected was that Li Yundong had actually entered a meditative state at this time. The moment Zi Yuan received the second golden invitation, she had already figured out what kind of situation she was going to face alone. In those short 10 seconds, many scenes flashed through Zi Yuan's mind. If it weren't for the fact that Masako Tachibana Wakako had defeated her at the Taoist assembly, Li Yundong would have definitely taken action. Later, because of this matter, Masako Tachibana was furious. In order to get back at her, she sent Saionji Tsunekatsu. In the end, Li Yundong went to Dongying, which led to the release of the remnant soul of the mystical silver fox. All of this led to Li Yundong going to Hainan to keep an eye on Chao Kefi, the remnant soul of the mystical silver fox. Finally, he met Zhang Zhishuan. By chance, he got Zhang Zhishuan's favor and got his true inheritance. At this critical moment, he entered a meditative state. All of this finally froze in front of Zi Yuan's eyes. She let out a long sigh in her heart. She was a person who believed in fate. You almost there. All of these coincidences made Zi Yuan think sadly in her heart, is it true that God wants to destroy our Linggong sect? Since the Linggong sect is going to die, I'll die with it. With Zi Yuan's wisdom and Wan Hongling's intelligence, it was impossible for them not to know what would be waiting for them if they attended the inauguration ceremony without the three great treasures of the sect. Wan Hongling also cried and tried to persuade Zi Yuan not to go to Mount Longhu. Now, the leader of the Linggong sect was a poison to Zi Yuan, a fire pit. If she went, she would die. But no matter how she tried to persuade her, Zi Yuan just smiled and said calmly, Hongling, there's no need to say anything more. No matter how dangerous the situation is, I will go. Because I am Zi Yuan of the Linggong sect. What a proud and conceited sentence. But Shiji, you can't ruin yourself like this because of your identity. You can't jump down a mountain of knives and a sea of fire because of your pride. Wan Hongling looked at her Shiji with tears in her eyes. She couldn't help but sob in her heart, Shiji, why don't you always live for yourself? When Master left the psalm for you, you lived for it. After you met Li Jiandong and fell in love with him, you lived for him. But now? Why do you want to be buried with this sect? The more Wan Hongling thought about it, the more her heart ached. She couldn't help but grab Zi Yuan and cry desperately, Shiji, we don't want to be the leader anymore. Let's go. I don't want to see you like this. Her voice was sorrowful and mournful, and everyone who heard it was moved. Although the cultivators of the various sects present were fighting fiercely in private, they couldn't help but feel a little sad when they saw such a cruel factional strife in the open. Even Mao Yuchang, who had been very arrogant and sharp-tongued before, was a little silent. Only Zhou Ping hid in the crowd and was in high spirits. She glanced at Zi Yuan gloatingly and thought to herself, Zi Yuan, how could you have such a day? Haven't you always been standing high in the clouds? I want to see if you can still be so elegant and eye-catching after falling into the mud. Thinking of attracting attention, Zhou Ping couldn't help glancing at Zhang Tianhe, who was not far away. As the son of Zhang Tianshizi, Zhang Tianhe was the direct descendant of the Orthodox sect. His status was not trivial, so he was also wearing a purple Taoist robe. However, at this time, he was staring at Zi Yuan anxiously. He gritted his teeth and clenched his fists, as if he couldn't wait to rush out and help Zi Yuan. Zhou Ping suddenly became furious. Her heart was filled with hatred and anger. She hated that her Shiji had never looked at her. His eyes were always on Zi Yuan, but she was angry that Zi Yuan had never looked at him. Even now, her Shiji was still infatuated with her. Zhou Ping saw that there were countless sympathetic gazes around her. Zhang Ling also looked at Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling in silence. She was afraid that her master would let Zi Yuan go like this, so she couldn't help but shout, "Is the Jingyi school a place where you can come and go as you please? The thousands of years of rules of the Jingyi school can't be broken in your hands." Her loud shout immediately attracted the gazes of everyone around to look at her in unison. Mao Yucheng looked at her deeply and sneered in a low voice, "What a vicious heart. Do you want to kill us all?" Humph. Zhang Ling saw that the other Taoist priests of the Jingyi school in purple robes were looking at Zhou Ping with dissatisfaction in their eyes. She immediately glared at Zhou Ping and shouted, "Shut up. It's not your turn to speak here." Zhou Ping's goal had been achieved. She immediately lowered her head and looked submissive, but a smug smile secretly appeared at the corner of her mouth. Zhang Ling had indeed wavered for a moment just now. Logically speaking, if Zi Yuan gave up the position of the leader of the Linggong sect and took over, then their goal could be said to have been achieved. However, Zhou Ping's public words had put the Jingyi school in a very awkward position. If they let Zi Yuan go just like that, the rules of the Jingyi school would be gone from then on, and no one would take it seriously. Zhang Ling only hesitated for a moment, then gritted her teeth and shouted, "Zi Yuan. A country has its laws, a family has its rules, and a school has its dogma. I will punish you on behalf of the leader of the Jingyi school. Are you convinced?" If Li Yundong had still been there, Zhang Ling would never have said such a thing. But now, no one was willing to stand up for Zi Yuan. It was incredible that she was alone. Even if she wanted to be ruthless, she had become much bolder. Zi Yuan had long expected such a situation. She smiled slightly, and her smile was like the clear clouds covering the moon. She said lightly, "I'm convinced." Zhang Ling and the others immediately felt relieved. She nodded and said in a deep voice, "It's good that you're convinced." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly heard a loud shout coming from the air, "I'm not convinced." This shout was like a bolt from the blue, immediately attracting everyone's attention in the direction of the voice. Everyone saw an extremely beautiful woman standing in the air, looking at them with disdain in her eyes and a sneer on her face. This woman had an oval face. Her face was small and enchanting, and there was a cinnabar beauty mole between her eyebrows. Although there was a mocking and contemptuous smile at the corner of her mouth, she was charming, which made people fall head over heels for her. Zhang Lufang looked at the woman with her mouth agape and said in surprise, "Who is this? Why is she so beautiful?" Zhang Kongyun suddenly stood up, gritted his teeth, and glared at the woman. He said one word at a time, "Ao. Wu. Shuang." Every cultivator present heard these three words clearly. They all burst into an uproar and looked at the woman in the air with a contemptuous look in her eyes. Ao Wushuang? Why was she here? There was still one more chapter to go. Chapter 687. Ao Wushuang's appearance caught everyone off guard, especially since there were many cultivators who had participated in the siege of Mount Tianlong. Wan Hongling looked at Ao Wushuang with her mouth agape, but soon there was a flash of joy in her eyes. She gently pulled Zi Yuan's sleeve and said in a low voice, "Shiji, we have reinforcements coming. However, Ziyuan's expression remained the same. Instead, there was a flash of worry in her eyes. Why is she here? Her coming is a disaster, not a blessing. She shouldn't have come. Soon, some cultivators came to their senses. They all shouted at the same time, Ao Wushuang, what are you doing here? Ao Wushuang, what are you doing here? Do you want to die? How dare you come to Mount Longhu? Wrong, it should be the courage of a fox. Zhang Ling's face was as hard as iron. She said with a cold face, Ao Wushuang, how dare you come here? Don't you know where this is? Zhang Kongyun seemed to be unable to control his anger. He suddenly jumped into the field, pointed at Ao Wushuang angrily, and shouted, Ao Wushuang, you be *tch. How dare you come to Mount Longhu? Ao Wushuang fell from the air and smiled coldly. You have the face to harm two helpless little girls. Why don't I have the face to come here? Zhang Kongyun was not good at arguing with others. He was so angry that his whole body was trembling. He scolded angrily, Bullsh *t, Bullsh *t. Zhang Ling, on the other hand, was born with an iron tongue and a heart of iron. This was also the reason why she could preside over many affairs of the Zhini school even though her cultivation was not at the top. She looked at Ao Wushuang coldly and said, Ao Wushuang, this is our Zhini school's own business. It's not your turn to talk about it. 10 years ago, you caused chaos in the Linggong sect of the Zhini school. You seduced Wang Yuanshan, the leader of the sect, with your beauty, causing him to commit suicide out of shame. You are the only one left to live in the world. Don't you feel ashamed? If I were you, I would have committed suicide long ago. Zhang Ling's words were sharp, and every word was like a knife stabbing Ao Wushuang's vital points. If it had been someone else, they would have been scolded until they vomited blood. But who was Ao Wushuang? Although Wang Yuanshan, the head of the Linggong sect, and his junior sister, Yan Feng, were not engaged or committed to each other, the cultivation world regarded them as a couple. Even Taoist Master Zhang, the head of the Zhini school, had tried his best to bring them together. But at this time, Ao Wushuang intervened and snatched Wang Yuanshan away, causing Wang Yuanshan to betray the sect. In the end, Wang Yuanshan was captured by the Zhini school and sentenced to death. 10 years ago, everyone in the cultivation world knew about this matter. Every cultivator was shocked by Ao Wushuang's actions and Wang Yuanshan's arrogance. When Wang Yuanshan was alive, no one dared to criticize Ao Wushuang. But after Wang Yuanshan passed away, Ao Wushuang had been alone for 10 years, and all the cultivators in the world had scolded her for 10 years. For the past 10 years, Ao Wushuang had lived in such rumors, curses, and humiliation. How could she be knocked down by Zhang Ling's words? Ao Wushuang raised his head and laughed. His laughter was full of sharp sarcasm. You also know that this is Zhini school's own business? At the beginning, Wang Yuanshan and I fell in love with each other. Isn't it our own business? But you sanctimonious hypocrites couldn't bear to see me and Wang Yuanshan fall in love with each other, so you forcibly broke us up. Is this what you call shame? Zhang Ling was furious and scolded, Ao Wushuang, don't try to confuse right and wrong. It was obviously you who bewitched Wang Yuanshan, but you actually framed him. Ao Wushuang sneered and said, Wang Yuanshan has long passed away. Naturally, you have the final say. But let me tell you, 10 years ago, you could bully me. 10 years later, I won't tolerate you bullying Ziyuan and Wan Hongling. Zhang Ling was furious and shouted, Ao Wushuang, who do you think you are? How dare you interfere in the affairs of our Zhini school? Who are you to the Linggong sect? Who are you to Ziyuan? Ao Wushuang smiled coldly and said proudly, I am Wang Yuanshan's wife. Of course, I have to take care of his disciple. This sentence caused an uproar in the field. When Wang Yuanshan had betrayed the sect and left, all the members of the Zhini school had taken it as a great shame. Not only did they claim that Ao Wushuang had seduced Wang Yuanshan, but they also claimed that Wang Yuanshan had been enlightened before he became an immortal and had said that he had severed all ties with Ao Wushuang. Ao Wushuang's words poked the most painful part of the Zhengyi school, which made all the cultivators of the Zhengyi school furious. They scolded her one after another, and even the cultivators of other sects were cursing her loudly with disdain. Zhang Lufang looked at the field in a daze. Although she knew that this was the case of Wang Yuanshan's betrayal, which had shocked the cultivation world 10 years ago, she was still very young at that time and didn't understand this matter deeply. How could she have known that this matter could cause such a big wave when it was brought up again today? She was looking at the field blankly, but she heard Mao Yuchang sneer at the cultivators on the field and sneer in a low voice, "Humph, a group of hypocrites." Mao Yuchang's mouth was sharp and mean, and she was proud and conceited. Zhang Lufang had already experienced it, but at this time, her words came out of nowhere, and she didn't know who she was attacking. But when Zhang Lufang took a look, she saw that Mao Yuchang was glancing at the many male cultivators around her with an extremely contemptuous look. Although she was still a budding girl, she was no longer a silly girl who had just awakened to love. Naturally, she could see many hidden desires in the eyes of these men at a glance. This kind of desire was like a flame, and they couldn't wait to devour this extremely beautiful and charming woman. However, these people obviously wished that they were Wang Yuanshan, but they scolded Ao Wushuang in a righteous manner. Looking at this scene, Zhang Liufang's heart skipped a beat. She opened her mouth to speak, but found that she couldn't say a word. This little girl suddenly seemed to have matured a lot. When Zhang Ling saw that Ao Wushuang dared to call herself Wang Yuanshan's wife in public, she was so angry that her whole body was trembling, and her voice was trembling. "You shameless witch, it seems that I really can't allow you to be so presumptuous today." Ao Wushuang squinted at her contemptuously and sneered. Then she turned around and walked over to Ziyuan. She fixed her eyes on her and asked as if there was no one else around, "Ziyuan, I want to take you away. Are you willing?" Wan Hongling's heart was in her throat. She grabbed Ziyuan's arm tightly and stared at her lips, for fear that she would say something against her will. However, Ziyuan looked at Ao Wushuang indifferently. She sighed softly and said noncommittally, "You shouldn't have come." Ao Wushuang snorted and laughed self-deprecatingly. 10 years ago, Wang Yuanshan was captured by this group of hypocrites. I should have gone at that time. 10 years later, his disciple was going to be framed again. If I hadn't come, Wang Yuanshan would have scolded me in heaven. Ziyuan sighed and opened her mouth. Just as she was about to speak, she heard Zhang Kongyan shout, "Ao Wushuang. You're courting death. 10 years ago, I wanted to kill you to avenge my good friend. Today, not only do you dare to come to this place, but you also dare to confuse black and white." Ao Wushuang turned her head and squinted at Zhang Kongyan. She sneered and said, "You old fool, why are you shouting here instead of staying in your own Taoist temple and taking care of your disciples? If Wang Yuanshan hadn't fallen into your trap, how could he have ended up like this? It was you who betrayed your friend for glory and betrayed me first. How dare you point at my nose and scold me?" Zhang Kongyan's face turned black with anger. The bones all over his body crackled, and a stream of white qi rushed up from the top of his head. The usually lazy old man was really angry at this time. Every time he took a step, the hard bluestone ground would immediately sink into a footprint, as if Zhang Kongyan was stepping on a piece of soft mud. Zhang Kongyan gritted his teeth and said, Today I'm going to enforce justice on behalf of heaven." Ao Wushuang raised her head and laughed. "Enforce justice on behalf of heaven? Well, this is the favorite excuse of you decent people." As she spoke, countless white hairs quickly grew all over her body, and in the blink of an eye, she turned into a huge seven-tailed white fox. She glared at Wang Yuanshan and said sternly, "I want to see what you can do to me." This time, there was a burst of exclamations. Although Mount Longhu was the ancestral court of the Zhengyi school, it was also a Taoist holy land. Ao Wushuang dared to show her real body in such a place and fight with others. This was too arrogant. In particular, the Taoist priests and nuns of the Jingyi school were so surprised and angry that they couldn't believe their eyes. Zhang Ling was furious. In an instant, her hands were surrounded by raging flames, and her whole body seemed to be shrouded in a ball of blazing flames. Zhang Kongyun's body was shrouded in a faint layer of golden light, and he walked toward Ao Wushuang step by step. Although his pace was not fast, each step shook the mountain slightly. It was as if a towering giant was walking toward Ao Wushuang. Although Ao Wushuang was conceited, she also knew that the Jingyi school had been a Taoist cultivation sect for thousands of years. Although it had declined in recent years, a centipede was still alive. It was absolutely impossible for her to be a match for so many masters of the Jingyi school. Ao Wushuang quickly turned her head and said to Zi Yuan in a hurry, "You guys go quickly, I." Before she could finish her words, she heard Ruan Hongling exclaim, "Be careful." Ao Wushuang only felt a strong wind coming from her side. Her heart trembled, and she suddenly leaped up. There was a loud bang at her original position. It was Zhang Kongyun who leaped high in an instant and smashed toward the place where Ao Wushuang was like a meteor. With this smash, the ground suddenly caved in. The surrounding 2-inch thick stone slabs were shattered and turned over, and a 2-foot deep pit was smashed out of the ground. Although Ao Wushuang had dodged the blow, Zhang Ling's raging fire soon came to her face. Ao Wushuang snorted angrily and swung the 7 tails behind her. Suddenly, there was a gust of wind that was like a blade around her. The sound of the gust of wind breaking through the air was ear-piercing, and the wind blades were so sharp and fierce that they seemed to tear the air and space apart. As soon as the fireball passed by them, it was immediately torn into countless pieces by the sharp wind blades and scattered in all directions. When Zhang Ling, Zhang Kongyun, and the other masters of the Jingyi school saw that Ao Wushuang had dodged the 2 attacks, they immediately snorted angrily and were about to pounce on her together. However, as soon as they moved, they saw a tall, delicate woman standing in front of them. It was Zi Yuan. Zhang Ling shouted angrily, "Zi Yuan, get out of the way." Zi Yuan's expression was still indifferent. She said softly, "I'm sorry, Zhenren Zhang. I can't let her go." Zhang Kongyun also gritted his teeth and said, "Zi Yuan, are you crazy? You're actually protecting a fox demon?" Zhou Ping also took the opportunity to add insult to injury. "Zi Yuan, everyone says that you collude with evildoers and collude with bandits. What else do you have to say today? Why are you protecting a demon?" Zi Yuan smiled faintly and said, "Because she is my master's wife, so I have to protect her." Zhang Kongyun widened his eyes and said in a trembling voice, "Zi Yuan, are you really crazy? Do you know what you're saying? Get out of the way. It's not too late to rein in the horse before the cliff." Zi Yuan glanced at him faintly and said softly, "Zhenren Kongyun, everyone says that your spiritual energy is strong and your jinshin is amazing. Can I ask you for advice today?" All the people of the Jingyi school gasped and looked at Zi Yuan in disbelief. Zhang Kongyun's body trembled and he thought to himself, 10 years ago, I was forced to fight with Wang Yuanshan and caught him with my own hands. 10 years later, he wants me to catch his disciple again? Update. Chapter 688. History was surprisingly similar, as if it was a reincarnation of fate. Zhang Kongyun trembled all over as he faced Zi Yuan, whose face and eyes were even colder. Even though he hated Ao Wushuang to the bone, he loved and sympathized with Zi Yuan. He didn't want to be her enemy, let alone fight with her. As the saying goes, fists and feet have no eyes, and knives and swords are merciless. Fighting was not like eating and chatting. A little carelessness could lead to the destruction of both body and soul. He had already let Wang Yuanshan down. How could he hurt his disciple again? Zhang Kongyun shouted in a hoarse voice, "Zi Yuan, you are a disciple of our Jingyi school. Why do you want to be our enemy? Why do you have to protect this woman, just like your master? Are you also going to apostatize for her?" Zi Yuan was silent. She glanced at Ao Wushuang, shook her head gently, and said lightly, "Uncle Masters of the Juni school, it's true that I damaged the powerful magical weapon of the Linggong sect. If you punish me, I will surrender and never resist. But if you want to harm Ao Wushuang, then I have to fight back, because I believe that even my master doesn't want to see Ao Wushuang end up like this." Zhang Kongyun shouted excitedly, "But your master didn't." Before he could finish speaking, Zhang Ling suddenly shouted angrily, "Zi Yuan, do you want to follow in Wang Yuanshan's footsteps?" Good, good, a famous teacher produces a brilliant disciple. As soon as she finished speaking, she saw Ao Wushuang suddenly change back into her human form and stare at Zhang Kongyun sharply. "Explain what you just said clearly. Is Wang Yuanshan all right?" Ao Wushuang's body trembled slightly, and her voice was full of shock. She was keenly aware that Zhang Kongyun had obviously said something wrong just now, but he was immediately interrupted by Zhang Ling. Ao Wushuang was deeply in love with Wang Yuanshan. Not long after Wang Yuanshan was captured, the news that he had become an immortal came out. Everyone in the world believed that Wang Yuanshan was dead, and it was definitely not as the people of the Juni school had said. He had become an immortal, and he must have been punished by the Juni school for apostasy. But Ao Wushuang didn't believe it, because she knew Wang Yuanshan's magical abilities too well. Wang Yuanshan could be captured and sealed, but it was absolutely impossible for him to be killed in body and soul, unless he entered the Sanja formation of the Juni school. The three ultimate formation was known as the ultimate formation of heaven, earth, and man. Even if a living golden immortal entered the formation, he would be blasted into pieces. His body would turn into powder, and his yang spirit would turn into nothingness, unable to be reborn again. However, although the three ultimate magic formation was terrifying, the only magic formation that could completely kill Wang Yuanshan 10 years ago had not been formed at all. Therefore, she did not believe that the Juni school at that time had the ability to kill Wang Yuanshan. Because of this, Ao Wushuang firmly believed that Wang Yuanshan was not dead at first, but as time went by, she began to waver and doubt it. Because if even one of Wang Yuanshan's yang spirit avatars escaped, Ao Wushuang firmly believed that he would definitely return to her side. But for the past 10 years, she had waited bitterly and foolishly, but she had never received any news of his whereabouts. Could it be that Wang Yuanshan had really ascended to immortality? Every time Ao Wushuang thought of this, she wanted to rush to Mount Longhu to find out what was going on. However, after the sudden change 10 years ago, her temperament had also changed. She knew that if she was impulsive, the consequences would be unimaginable. But today, she finally gritted her teeth and came here. However, she accidentally heard some clues from Zhang Kongyun's mouth. How could she not be excited? Ao Wushuang's heart, which had already turned into cold ashes, suddenly turned into a raging fire. Zhang Kongyun looked at the excited and fanatical Ao Wushuang. He complained in his heart, but his face was full of anger. He shouted, "Ao Wushuang, haven't you harmed Wang Yuanshan enough? He was forced to ascend because of you, leaving Zi Yuan and Wan Hongling alone." While he was speaking, Ao Wushuang didn't seem to hear him. She just stared at Zhang Kongyun and said in a trembling voice, "Wang Yuanshan, he's not dead, is he?" Zi Yuan also saw the clues. She trembled all over and looked at Zhang Kongyun in shock. She saw that Zhang Kongyun's eyes were changing and his expression was angry. This extremely intelligent woman suddenly said, "It turns out that you have been lying to me for the past 10 years. You imprisoned my master, didn't you?" The situation in the Taoist temple had taken a sharp turn for the worse. When everyone saw that Zi Yuan and Zhang Kongyun were about to fight, they sighed in their hearts. However, they didn't expect that Zhang Kongyun's inadvertent words would turn a case that everyone was familiar with 10 years ago around. So Wang Yuanshan was not dead? It wasn't that no one had thought of this before, but with the passage of time, Wang Yuanshan was slowly forgotten by them. But now, it was suddenly brought up in such an occasion. They couldn't help but feel shocked. Especially for the big sects, such as the Maoshan sect, the Chuanjin sect, and the Qingqing sect, who were determined to rule the cultivation world. If Wang Yuanshan was really not dead, then this news would be too terrible. If the Jingyi school did not kill Wang Yuanshan, then what did they want to do with him? He was a famous master of lightning retribution 10 years ago. Even Master Zhang had said that Wang Yuanshan was unparalleled in the world in terms of fighting methods, and I'm not as good as him. If he hadn't died, what realm would he be in 10 years? For the other sects, although the current Jingyi school was strong, its power could still be resisted. It could be regarded as a delicate balance of power. But if Wang Yuanshan appeared out of nowhere again, then the other sects would have no power to resist. Thinking of this, the cultivators of the other sects looked at Zhang Ling, Zhang Kongyun, and the others of the Jingyi school with unkind eyes. At this moment, they would rather believe that Wang Yuanshan was not dead. The conspiracy theory quickly took root in everyone's heart. Zhang Ling was not the best at fighting methods, but she was good at grasping the overall situation. Seeing that things were not going well, she immediately pointed at Zi Yuan and shouted, "Zi Yuan, are you stupid enough to believe such a rumor? Wang Yuanshan was infatuated with the demoness and betrayed our sect. He should be killed. The law of our Jingyi school is as firm as a mountain. How can we cover up for him?" Zhou Ping also took advantage of the situation and interrupted, "Master, if the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. With a master like this, how good will a disciple be?" Zi Yuan looked at her coldly and asked, "If my master is really a flying immortal, then where is his golden body? Why haven't you let me see it in the past 10 years? Any master who cultivated to the Jinshan phase would not decay even after ascending. His appearance would be the same as when he was alive. Such a body that had lost its yang spirit, soul, and vitality was called a golden body by cultivators. Although it had the same name as the Jinshan phase, in fact, it specifically referred to the bones of cultivators after they had ascended, not to the cultivation realm of cultivators. Soon, Ruan Hongling's eyes lit up, and her pretty face turned red with excitement. Yes, when you said that Master was a flying immortal, Shiji said that she wanted to see Master's golden body. Why did you stop her?" Ao Wushuang clenched her teeth. Although she didn't say a word, her trembling body had already exposed her inner excitement. In the face of Zi Yuan and Ruan Hongling's difficulties, Zhang Ling scolded angrily, "B*****. Can a traitor keep his golden body? Let me tell you, his golden body has long been turned into powder by the leader's ninth heaven divine thunder. You want to see him? Go to heaven and see. The greater the expectation, the greater the disappointment." Ao Wushuang couldn't help it. She let out a shrill scream and rushed toward Zhang Ling. Zhang Ling was not afraid at all. She shouted, "Come on." She slammed her hands on the ground, and with a loud rumble, the ground beneath her feet immediately cracked into countless cracks. In an instant, several huge holes were torn into the ground, and within each hole, there were raging flames and surging lava. Zhang Ling pressed her hands on the ground, and the raging fire and magma in the cracks suddenly boiled up, wrapping her tightly like a waterfall. Everyone saw that Ao Wushuang was about to collide with Zhang Ling in an instant. With a bang, the wall of fire in front of Zhang Ling was instantly twisted like a wave, and flames shot in all directions. Ao Wushuang's whole body was instantly bounced back, and her whole body was wrapped in flames. However, there was no sign of her being burned in the flames. Instead, she raised her hand in front of her, and all the flames flew to her fingertips, forming a small fireball that didn't jump. It was as dexterous and obedient as a small pet. Ao Wushuang clenched her fingers into a fist and crushed the fireball. Her eyes were cold, and her voice was extremely angry. "Zhang Ling, take out your Samadhi true fire. I can't do anything to this mere 9 earth true fire." Zhang Ling glared at him and said, "Do you want to die? Well, I'll fulfill your wish." Zhang Kongyun knew how powerful Ao Wushuang was. He was afraid that something would happen to Zhang Ling, so he shouted at Ao Wushuang, surrender now. Eldest Shiji doesn't need to kill a chicken. I'm enough. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw Zi Yuan standing in front of him. She stared at him and said, Jinren Kong Yun. For the sake of your friendship with my master for so many years, tell me the truth. Is my master really not dead? Zhang Kongyun hesitated for a while, but soon he gritted his teeth and said, Zi Yuan, Wang Yuanshan brought this upon himself. His body and soul have long been destroyed. Don't fantasize anymore. Get out of the way, or don't blame me for being ruthless. However, Zi Yuan didn't move at all. Her eyes were still fixed on Zhang Kongyun, and there was no sign of her moving aside. Zhang Kongyun was furious. Zi Yuan, this is an act of apostasy. Are you really going to apostatize for Ao Wushuang? Zi Yuan bit her lip and clenched her fists tightly. Tell me where my master is. Zhang Kongyun was furious. Unreasonable. Get out of the way. After that, he was about to step forward. At this time, the situation on the field was changing, and the cultivators of all sects were stunned. Mao Yuchang sneered and said, well, it's really twists and turns. This inauguration ceremony is really interesting. Su Yangzi glared at her and said, don't talk nonsense. Why don't you hurry up and persuade them? Mao Yuchang sneered and said in a low voice, don't you want them to fight until their heads are broken and bleeding? Su Yangzi was furious and shouted, you. Before he could finish his words, he saw the two sides on the field quickly coming into contact and were about to fight. But at this moment, a clear Buddhist chant came from the distance of the Taoist temple, followed by a very magnetic voice. Amitba. I'm Imagawa Koyun of the Tiantai sect. Greetings, Jinren of the Chinese Taoist sects. Then, all kinds of voices sounded one after another. Kaisai Hikari of the Jinren sect. Greetings, everyone. Saionji Tsunakatsu of the Jinren sect. Greetings, everyone. Chapter 689. A series of voices came from the mountainside of Mount Longhu, causing Ao Wushuang and the others, who were fighting fiercely, to stop one after another. They all looked in the direction of the voices in bewilderment. At this moment, almost everyone understood that whether it was a blessing or a curse, they could not avoid it. Although the Zhengyi school had deliberately brought forward the inauguration ceremony many days in order to avoid the Japanese cultivation group, the Japanese still came knocking on their door. Damn it. Although their eyes were red and they wanted to fight to the death just now, Ao Wushuang and Zhang Ling soon separated. Zi Yuan and Zhang Kongyun looked at each other, then turned around and faced the direction of the Japanese. Only Zhang Lufang, Deng Yu, and Deng Jiao followed the gazes of the crowd with blank faces. The three of them were either naive, reclusive, or indifferent to worldly affairs. They had no idea what was about to happen. Zhang Tongtian, the head of the Qingqing sect, who had been keeping a low profile in the crowd, and his shitty, Zhang Huashui, snorted at the same time. Zhang Huashui clenched his fists so hard that they made a cracking sound, and he said in Sichuanese, damn it. Why did these F***ers really come? It's good that they came. Watch me beat these sons of bitches into meat paste. Zhang Tongtian immediately grabbed him with one hand and said in a deep voice, shitty, don't be impulsive. Let's see what the other sects will do. Zhang Huashui turned his head and stared at him with red eyes. Shitty, you're still too naive. In the end, we're the fools who came here on our own. Look at the people of the other sections. Each of their leaders is more cunning than the other. They simply don't come. Do you still expect them to stand out? Bah. Zhang Tongtian's face darkened, and he still said, don't worry. Let's see what happens first. Zhang Huashui snorted angrily and turned his face away. Naturally, most of the cultivators present had heard the news that they could only lose and not win. Wei Qing and Yu Xing of the Chuanjin sect saw that the Japanese were arriving in the blink of an eye, and they immediately looked at Du Fei. However, Du Fei shook his head slightly at them and said in a low voice, "The overall situation is more important. Don't be impulsive." Wei Qing and Yuxing snorted at the same time, their faces full of unwillingness. At this time, Japanese cultivators slowly appeared on the mountain road. Most of these cultivators were dressed in the clothes of various sections. Some held Buddhist staffs and wore bamboo hats. They wore orange monk robes and white monk robes. Some did not wear bamboo hats and wore yellow kasayas. Some wore white robes with a black crown on their heads and held a fan in their hands. When these cultivators went up the mountain, some of them reported their sex names and dharma names in Chinese, while others reported in Japanese. Although it seemed a little messy, after they finished reporting, they were very silent. No one looked sideways, and the atmosphere was solemn, as if they were here to fight to the death. But walking in front of these people were about 7 or 8 men and women dressed in ordinary clothes. The leader was a fat man with big ears. Although he was dressed in a suit and leather shoes, it was hard to hide his fat and bureaucratic aura. From afar, everyone could see that he was walking in front with his belly protruding out, looking around. It was none other than Lu Chunping. Behind him were some local officials of Jiangxi province and 3 female interpreters. These people walked in front, fanning themselves while pointing at the surrounding scenery. Some even took photos with their mobile phones, as if they were on a scenic tour. Mao Yuchang's mouth was sharp and unkind. She giggled and said to Su Yangzi, who was standing next to her, "Hey, if we give each of these guys a bicycle and stick a piece of dog skin plaster on their foreheads, wouldn't they be no different from the traitors who lured the devils into the village?" Su Yangzi was a cautious person, but when he heard this, he couldn't help but think of the classic scenes in movies and TV shows. He couldn't help laughing, but soon he glared at her and said, "What nonsense are you talking about? Don't talk nonsense like this later. Be careful not to get into trouble." Zhang Ling and Zhang Kongyun of the Zhengyi school looked at each other. Zhang Ling quietly withdrew her zhenqi, and the cracked ground under her feet automatically closed with a cracking sound. Zhang Kongyun also walked to the big pit that he had made before. He gently stamped his foot, and the blue bricks on the ground immediately set off a wave like a carpet that had been shaken by someone. Every blue brick was shaken. When they were flat again, the ground had returned to normal. If it weren't for the fact that there were still some stone cracks in the original depression, ordinary people would have thought that nothing had happened on the ground just now. After Lu Chunping led a group of local officials into the Taoist field of the Taoist temple, he saw at a glance that everyone on the field was looking at them. Lu Chunping was worthy of being in the officialdom all year round. He was unaware of all kinds of eyes around him. He laughed, turned his head and said to Sayonji Tsunekatsu behind him, "You are right. They are really here." Strange, I asked several local people who were in charge of this matter, and they all said they didn't know. "How did you know?" Sayonji Tsunekatsu maintained a polite posture. His smile was modest and polite, which made people feel very good. But only when he lowered his eyes would there be a flash of disdain and contempt in his eyes. Sayonji Tsunekatsu smiled and said, "There is a saying in China that heroes cherish heroes. I think it's for this reason that we found them." Sayonji Tsunekatsu's words were very good. He not only alluded to the identity of the cultivators of China and Japan, but also flattered Lu Chunping and the others. Although Lu Chunping and the others were not cultivators, who didn't like to hear foreigners praise their own country's people, Lu Chunping laughed and waved his hand. He turned to look at Ise Izumo, who was not far behind Sayonji Tsunekatsu, and said with a smile, "Miss Izumo, who do you think is a hero in your Japanese delegation? And who is a hero in our China delegation?" This time, because the Japanese cultivation group was the vanguard group, only a quarter of the total number of people had originally planned to come. There were even fewer powerful witches and goddesses of Shintoism, and even fewer women like Ise Izumo, who were extremely beautiful and had outstanding temperament. When Lu Chunping saw Izumo for the first time, he was so shocked that he could hardly move his eyes away. Along the way, he had been thinking of ways to talk to this beautiful Miss Izumo. Even if she didn't speak, it was good to look at her a few more times. Izumo's temperament was originally cold. She saw that this Chinese man wanted to stick his eyes on her as soon as he saw her. Although there was a smile on her face, she hated this kind of person who kept nodding and bowing to her. However, although she was a person who was famous for being indifferent and reticent in the sect, when she went abroad, there were many places where she had to do as the Romans do. Especially after being reminded by the great priest Shenko, Izumo finally opened her mouth and said a few words to him. Although Izumo could speak Chinese, she didn't want to talk directly to this annoying fat man, so she had been talking to him through the interpreter. After the interpreter finished speaking to her, Izumo said softly, "On our side, everyone is a hero. On your side, you will only know who is a hero after the competition." Izumo was not good at communication, and her speech was not as smooth and shiny as Saionji Tsunekatsu's. When she said this, the interpreter frowned in his heart and didn't dare to translate it directly. After a little roundabout, he said, "Miss Izumo said that everyone on our side is a hero, and everyone on your side is also a hero." After listening to her translation, Izumo frowned secretly and glared at the interpreter unhappily. She was very dissatisfied with the interpreter's tampering with her original meaning. Lu Chunping didn't know any of this. After listening to the interpreter's words, he laughed and said, "Well said, well said. I didn't expect Miss Izumo to be so beautiful and speak so beautifully." Izumo couldn't stand it anymore. She said in Chinese, "I don't know which cultivator in China is a hero, but I know someone who can be considered a hero." Lu Chunping didn't react for a moment. He laughed and said, "Ah. Which one is Ing?" Miss Izumo, can you speak Chinese?" Lu Chunping didn't have time to think too much. He was overjoyed and said, "Miss Izumo, I didn't expect you to speak so well in China. Amazing, really amazing. Just now, which one of us was a hero?" As he spoke, he looked at Izumo with joy in his eyes. He looked like a child waiting for praise and reward. In his opinion, he had been careful, smiling, and praising her all along the way. The other party should return the favor and praise him, right? Everyone carried the sedan chair, and returning the favor was the way of the king. But he didn't know that if this sentence was spoken to someone like Saionji Tsunekatsu or Ise Shinguang, who was good at diplomacy, it would definitely be a compliment. But why would Ise Izumo care about this? She said without hesitation, "Among the cultivators in China, there is a person named Li Yundong. This person can be called a hero, a great hero." The smile on Lu Chunping's face suddenly froze. He cursed in his heart, "Damn it, this Li Yundong is a B** starred. What kind of hero is he?" But after all, he was an old fox in the officialdom. Although he was angry in his heart, he didn't show it on his face. He laughed and said, "It turns out that there is such a great person among the cultivators in China. I must meet him another day. Well, let's get to know each other." Ise Shinguang, who was next to Izumo, suddenly came over and said very seriously in Chinese, "Dear Mr. Lu, don't you know this Li Yundong? That's a pity. This Li Yundong is the most amazing person I've ever seen in China. I must see him again this time. If I can't see him, I'll be too disappointed." As he spoke, he looked at Ise Izumo and said with a smile, "Izumo, I remember that you have been praising him in front of me these days. You can't stop praising him, can you?" Ise Izumo was stunned. Just as he was about to speak, he immediately felt Ise Shinguang flick her gently with his finger. Ise Izumo immediately came to his senses and smiled faintly. "Yes." Lu Chunping's smile turned ugly. He laughed dryly, and a look of anger flashed in his eyes. He turned his head away and stopped talking to Yun Che. Instead, he walked to the front. Although Ise Izumo was indifferent and didn't like to deal with people, it didn't mean that she was a fool. She glanced at Ise Shinguang with flickering eyes and said in a low voice, "Do you want to kill Li Yundong?" Why do we have to use such means to deal with him? Don't you have confidence in me? Ise Shenguang smiled slightly. Li Yundong is indeed a great hero, and I'm not wrong. But a lion will do its best to fight a rabbit. Since we have chosen to fight, we must ensure that we win. In order to win, I don't care what means we have to use. As he spoke, he glanced at Lu Chunping, who was walking in front of him, and smiled meaningfully. This Chinese man is very stupid. At first glance, I can tell that he is jealous and narrow-minded. He will definitely make trouble for Li Yundong. And isn't internal strife what Chinese people are best at? There are 2 updates today. I'll try to make up for the remaining one tomorrow. Chapter 690. The arrival of the Japanese cultivation group had completely disrupted the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect. Lu Chunping swaggered to the Taoist field and stood in front of everyone with a smile on her face. She warmly greeted the cultivators from various sects around her. Ao Wushuang looked at these Japanese cultivators vigilantly and said to Ziyuan in a low voice, "Ziyuan, why don't you go? Stay here and wait for death?" Ziyuan also stared at these Japanese cultivators. She shook her head stubbornly and said, no matter what, today is the inauguration ceremony. How can I run away at the last minute? On the other hand, Senior Wushuang, you'd better leave quickly. Otherwise, these Japanese cultivators will harm you. Ao Wushuang snorted coldly and said, why would they harm me? Ziyuan glanced at Ao Wushuang and felt strange in her heart. Doesn't she know that the mystical silver fox has escaped? Thinking of this, Ziyuan wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. She shook her head helplessly and did not speak again. On the field, Zhang Ling of the Zhengyi school had no choice but to step forward, bow slightly, and ask, Almsgiver Lu, what brings you here? Lu Chunping had also met Zhang Ling once or twice. He returned the greeting according to the Taoist etiquette and said with a smile, I accompanied my Japanese friends here. They insisted on paying a visit to the Taoist holy land of Mount Longhu, so I followed them. Zhang Ling glanced at the Japanese cultivators who were stepping into the field. She was extremely unhappy, but she said calmly, our Zhengyi school and the Japanese cultivation world can be said to mind our own business. Why did they come to visit us? Lu Chunping said, hey, that's not right. As the saying goes, it is a joy to have friends come from afar. Our Japanese friends have come all the way here, which shows that your Zhengyi school has a profound influence. At this time, Sayonji Tsunekatsu also stepped forward and said, Lu Jun is right. Although the Japanese cultivation world and the Taoist cultivation world are 2 completely different cultivation worlds, if you look at the root, there is still a lot of origin. When the founder of Arjunyan Tantrism, Hongfa Dashi, went west to the Tang dynasty, he learned the theories and knowledge of Taoism and brought them back to Japan. Therefore, we are actually separated by a strip of water, of the same origin. Zhang Lufang suddenly scolded loudly, Bah, you are so shameless. Who has the same origin as you? How can you have the cheek to say such words? Our Zhengyi school was founded in the 2nd century AD by Grand Master Zhangling. Your Zhengyan Tantrism was founded by Hongfa Dashi in the 9th century AD. There is a gap of more than 700 years. How can we have the same origin? Zhang Liufang's shout made the faces of many Japanese cultivators change. The faces of many cultivators. The cultivators of all cheered Japanese cultivators changed. June of the cultivators of the sect. The sect. Japanese cultivators of the Dane sect. And of them of the cultivators of sect. Yu of Zhang 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 of Zhang, Zhang Zhang Yun turned and said in Zhang. After hearing Zhang Liufang's words, Sayonji Tsunekatsu glanced at her, but he still had a smile on his face. He said, no matter what, the friendship between the cultivation world of China and Japan has a long history. We must come up to pay our respects when we pass by Mount Longhu. Zhang Ling said in a deep voice, if you want to worship, you might as well go to the main peak. That is our main hall. This is just a side hall of the side peak. Moreover, our Juni school is holding a ceremony, so it is not convenient for us to receive outsiders. When Saionji Tsunekatsu heard this, he immediately looked at Lu Chunping. Lu Chunping understood and said with a smile, Zhenrenzhang, this is your fault. What do you mean by an outsider? How can there be outsiders here? We are all on the same side. We are all friends. Besides, there are so many people here who can attend this ceremony. Why can't we? Zhang Ling was speechless for a moment. She was very angry and didn't know what to say. Lu Chunping didn't seem to notice Zhang Ling's anger. He casually walked to the front of the crowd, cleared his throat, and said, Comrades, friends, today is not an ordinary day. We welcome fellow cultivators from distant foreign countries. Lu Chunping was very bureaucratic and liked to show off. Therefore, when he saw so many people here, he couldn't help but want to show off his official power. Besides, there were so many cultivators here. Normally, he really didn't dare to offend them, but now he had orders from the higher-ups. He knew that these cultivators had a lot to worry about and didn't dare to offend the higher-ups. Therefore, he was not afraid of these cultivators being naughty. When Lu Chunping was a local official, he liked to give speeches the most. Every time he went to a public place, he wanted to say a few words. But since he was transferred to the capital as an idle official, he had lost this great hobby. It was not easy to meet so many people today, so his addiction was immediately triggered. He began to talk at length on the field, his spittle flying everywhere. The cultivators of all sects present listened with their eyes wide open and felt drowsy. Wei Qing of the Chuanjin Dragon sect felt her head buzzing as she listened, and she was extremely impatient. Suddenly, she had an idea and smiled slyly at Du Fei and Yu Sheng in a low voice. Watch me play a trick on this annoying guy. As she spoke, a paper talisman quickly appeared between her two slender fingers. She pinched her fingers together and softly chanted a few incantations. The paper talisman instantly burned by itself and disappeared in a dazzling manner. Du Fei and Yu Sheng were both shocked and said in unison, "Don't act recklessly." But as soon as they finished speaking, they saw a person who was exactly the same as Lu Chunping appear next to him in an instant. Their expressions and postures were very similar, especially when this person imitated Lu Chunping's movements. He put his hands on his hips and looked proud of himself. The fake person behind Lu Chunping continued his words loudly, saying, Taijun said that this time, the Imperial Army is not here to rob food or women. They are just here to buy some soy sauce and then leave. Please rest assured. When Lu Chunping heard a voice that was exactly the same as his coming from behind him, he was shocked. He looked back abruptly and saw another version of himself dancing behind him. He was so shocked that he fell to the ground. There was suddenly a roar of laughter on the field. No matter how strong the patience of the cultivators of all sects was, they couldn't help but laugh out loud. When Yusheng heard that the phrase, "only defeat is allowed, no victory is allowed," had come from Lu Chunping, he had already breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. Seeing Wei Qing teasing Lu Chunping, he let out a breath of pleasure and laughed particularly loudly. After all, Du Fei was experienced and prudent. After laughing for a while, he immediately grabbed Wei Qing's hand and said quietly in a low voice, "Stop it. Be careful of getting into trouble." Wei Qing grimaced and was about to release the fingers in her hand when she saw Saionji Tsunekatsu suddenly take out a short vajra and point it at the dummy. The dummy suddenly trembled all over, and in an instant, it turned into a cloud of green smoke and scattered in all directions. Wei Qing couldn't stop it in time. With a muffled groan, she covered her chest and fell backward. Du Fei was shocked and quickly held her up. His fingers quickly pressed a few acupoints on her chest. Yu Sheng was furious. He glared at Saionji Tsunekatsu and was about to pounce on him. Du Fei was quick to react. He grabbed him and shouted in a low voice, "Yu Sheng, don't be impulsive. Don't you remember what my Shibwa said at the beginning? Yuxing's face turned purple and red. He glared at Saionji Tsunekatsu and snorted heavily. He turned around and carefully looked at Wei Qing's injury. Saionji Tsunekatsu glanced in the direction of Wei Qing. He quickly took 2 steps toward Lu Chunping and asked with concern, "Lu Jun, are you all right?" Lu Chunping looked embarrassed and angry. With the help of several officials next to him, he got up and glared at the many cultivators on the scene. He wanted to pursue the matter, but he didn't know who to look for, so he could only swallow his pride and let it go. Lu Chunping smiled reluctantly at Saionji Tsunekatsu and said, "I'm fine. Thank you for your concern." Then he said to the cultivators of the various sects on the field with a livid face, "I said so much just now. I hope that in the spirit of harmony and friendship, we can learn from each other, be modest, and unite with each other. Don't destroy the current harmonious environment. That's all I've said. You can do it yourselves." As he said this, he flicked his sleeves and walked to the side of the field. He gritted his teeth and glanced coldly at everyone here. Just now, he had lost face, so he immediately hated everyone here. Saionji Tsunekatsu smiled and said, as Lu Jun said, "We came here this time to learn from the cultivators of the Chinese cultivation world." Zhang Ling didn't wait for him to finish and said flatly, "No, today is the ceremony of our Linggong sect. We don't accept any duels or battles." Saionji Tsunekatsu seemed to have expected her to say this and asked, "Then where is Li Yundong, Li Jun? Is he here?" Zhang Ling sneered and said, "He didn't come. If you want to find him, go to the Fox Zen school to find him." "What are you doing here?" Saionji Tsunekatsu shook his head and said, "Li Yundong has a deep friendship with us, and we also heard that Li Jun and Jinren Zi Yuan have a deep friendship, so we came here for a reason." As he said this, he looked at Zi Yuan meaningfully and said, "I heard that the Linggong sect can ask for help at the inauguration ceremony, so we came here to cheer for Jinren Zi Yuan out of our friendship with Li Jun." The crowd suddenly burst into an uproar, and all kinds of complicated and shocked eyes looked at Zi Yuan. Zi Yuan had been very calm before, but at this time, her face suddenly changed. She was shocked and angry. She was shocked and angry that this Japanese was too vicious. His words were simply malicious. Ruan Hongling couldn't help but say angrily, "Don't do that. We don't need your help. This is the business of our Zhengyi school." Ruan Hongling's words immediately attracted a burst of applause from the crowd. Zhang Ling also said angrily, "Aren't you a little too much? How can you interfere in the affairs of our Zhengyi school?" At this time, Ao Wushuang sneered and said to Zi Yuan, "Zi Yuan, I told you to leave just now, but you didn't. Why is your temper exactly the same as your master's?" Before Zi Yuan could speak, she saw a monk behind Saionji Tsunekatsu suddenly find Ao Wushuang with his sharp eyes. He was shocked. He pointed at Ao Wushuang and shouted, "Mystical silver fox." The Japanese cultivators suddenly turned pale with fright. Everyone looked at Ao Wushuang in unison. Many cultivators suddenly leaped up and surrounded Ao Wushuang tightly. Imagawa Kagumo of the Tiantai sect looked at Ao Wushuang in shock. He took out a paper talisman from his arms and pointed at Ao Wushuang. The paper talisman rushed toward Ao Wushuang. Ao Wushuang saw the talisman, which was only 1 finger wide and 2 palms long, flying toward her. It was so light that it seemed that a gust of wind could blow it away. However, she keenly felt that it contained an extremely powerful Buddhist power. She didn't dare to take it at all. Her body flashed and she dodged the talisman. After the talisman rushed to where Ao Wushuang was, it did not continue to chase after her. Instead, it retracted back into Imagawa Kagumo's hand. Imagawa Kagumo shook his head and said, "It's not the mystical silver fox. It's just a 7-tailed divine fox. However, since she is a fox demon, she must have something to do with the mystical silver fox." When these Japanese cultivators heard this, they immediately became noisy. Catch her and ask her about the whereabouts of the mystical silver fox. Although Ao Wushuang was proud and arrogant, there were more than 200 Japanese cultivators here, and the weakest one was a master at the yang spirit level. At this time, they were all noisy. She couldn't help but turn pale with fear. She couldn't help but take a step back, gritting her teeth and staring at these Japanese cultivators. At this time, Ziyuan did not hesitate to step forward and stand in front of Ao Wushuang. She shouted angrily, "What do you want to do?" Imagawa Kagumo chanted the name of Buddha. Amitabha. Benefactor, please get out of the way. Don't stop us from subduing demons. As he spoke, he took a step forward. However, as soon as he took a step forward, he saw Zhang Kongyun standing in front of him with a frosty face. He said coldly, "Do you want to subdue demons on this land? It's not your turn to do it." Although Zhang Ling had always been at odds with Zi Yuan and the others, and she was extremely disgusted with Ao Wushuang, she cared about her face very much, and her temperament was extremely protective. Compared with the Japanese cultivators, no matter how wrong Zi Yuan and Ao Wushuang were, they were still part of China. If they wanted to take people away in front of her, where would she put her face? Where would the face of the Juni school be? Zhang Ling laughed angrily. Well, this is your friendly exchange. I've learned a lot. She turned her head and shouted, "Juni disciple." The old and young cultivators of the Juni school took a step forward and said in unison, "Yes." Zhang Ling pointed to the Japanese cultivators on the field and said sternly, "Get into formation." With a clatter, the disciples of the Juni school scattered in all directions in an instant, surrounding the more than 200 Japanese cultivators. The people on both sides rubbed their hands and glared at them. The battle was about to break out at any moment. Chapter 691. Just as the Japanese cultivators were climbing Mount Longhu, Su Chan was pacing back and forth anxiously in the room of the Xian State Guesthouse in Haikao City, Hainan Province. She was like an ant on a hot pan. She said anxiously, "The inauguration ceremony should have already begun, right? What happened to Sister Ziyuan? She'll be fine, right? Sister Zhou Qin, please say something. She and Ruan Hongling should be fine, right?" Zhou Qin was sitting cross-legged on the bed, flipping through the Vajra longevity power. Her heart was as calm as still water, but in fact, her eyes were fixed on the page. She didn't take in a single word at all, and her heart was burning with anxiety. Seeing that she was silent, Su Chan sat next to her and pushed her arm. She pointed to Li Yundong, who was sitting cross-legged in the room and said, "When will Yundong wake up?" Zhou Qin raised her head with a wry smile. "Su Chan, you've asked me this question 18 times. How would I know when Master will wake up?" Su Chan stamped her feet anxiously. "But what if something happens to Sister Ziyuan? If Yundong wakes up and finds out that something happened to Sister Ziyuan, won't he blame me to death?" Zhou Qin was not confident at all, so she became more and more flustered at this time. She said bitterly, "Don't say that. I'm also very worried. But what can we do now? If we rush over, who will protect Master?" Su Chan said tentatively, "Why don't I stay and you go?" However, Zhou Qin was a little worried about Su Chan's fighting strength. It was no problem for the little girl to protect herself, but how could she protect others? Forget it then. Perhaps if she stayed, he would be even more worried and flustered. But Zhou Qin didn't say this out loud. She just shook her head like a rattle. No. This is not good." Su Chan thought for a moment and said, "Then, you stay here, and I'll go?" Zhou Qin didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She thought, "What's the use of you going there? If the two of us go together, we can still be of some use. If only one of us goes, we'll just be sending them appetizers, not even enough to fill the gaps between their teeth." Su Chan saw Zhou Qin's bitter face and didn't comment. She said angrily, "Oh, you can't do this, and you can't do that. I'm so anxious. Sister Ziyuan is alone now, so she must be bullied to death. What should I do? I'm so worried, so worried. Zhou Qin sighed and said, stop it. If you keep talking, I'll be worried to death. It's useless to be anxious now. Just wait patiently. The little girl paced back and forth in front of Li Yundong, wishing that she could reach out and push him to wake him up. But every time she did that, she would take her hand back and continue to pace around the room irritably. Just as she was getting impatient, there was a sudden knock at the door of the room. A voice came from outside the door. Is Li Yundong in this room? Su Chan immediately stopped and listened carefully. She was pleasantly surprised. It seems to be Fifth Shibua. She immediately rushed to the door like a gust of wind and opened it. She saw Fifth Shibua, Lu Yuehong, standing at the door, looking at her with the same surprised expression. Oh, Su Chan, you're here too. That's great. Is the sect leader here? I heard from Wan Hongling that he's here. Su Chan grabbed Lu Yuehong and said like a machine gun, Fifth Shibua, it's great that you're here. Hurry up and help me and Sister Zhou Qin protect Yundong. We have to hurry to help Sister Zi Yuan. Lu Yuehong was stunned and didn't come to her senses. Ah. Zhou Qin understood what Su Chan meant. She said loudly, Su Chan, we can't leave Fifth Shibua alone. Unexpectedly, as soon as she finished speaking, another person came in. It was Chao Yi, the sixth Shibua of the Fox Zen School. Chao Yi said with a smile, what if I join you? Su Chan was overjoyed. Sixth Shibua, why are you here? Chao Yi stroked Su Chan's hair lovingly and said, Little Shimmy said that today is the inauguration ceremony of the Linggong sect. Our Fox Zen School is deeply indebted to Ziyuan. This time, no matter what, we have to help her get through the difficulties. We heard from Wan Hongling that the sect leader is meditating in seclusion here, and you are here to protect him, so we rushed over to help. Lu Yuehong said with a smile, yes, we don't have the ability of Shimmy. If we go to Mount Longhu, we will be walking into a trap. Not only will we not be able to help Zi Yuan, but we will also be a burden to them. But if we stay here to protect the sect leader, it won't be a problem. Chao Yi smiled and said, yes, you can rest assured. With us here, nothing will happen. Although we are not good at fighting, we can make a concealing formation. You can rest assured. Su Chan was overjoyed. That's great. She rushed over to Zhou Qin like a gust of wind and grabbed her. Sister Zhou Qin, let's go. It's too late. Zhou Qin was also a decisive person. She hesitated for a moment, then immediately said decisively, okay. Then I'll leave it to you two Shibua. After that, she placed Li Yundong's Bahuang sword and Liuhe's sword outside and let them automatically protect him. In addition, she took out his fan of 7 treasures and the burning thumb pot from the 7 treasures brocade pouch and placed them around him. If someone wanted to harm him, these powerful magical weapons would immediately protect him. Su Chan pulled Zhou Qin to the door and said to Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong with a smile, 5th Shibua, 6th Shibua, I'll leave it to you. We're leaving. Lu Yuehong and Chao Yi watched the two of them leave quickly. After looking at each other, they smiled at the same time, turned into the room, and closed the door. Lu Yuehong looked at Li Yundong, who was meditating on the ground. Although her cultivation was not high, she was a knowledgeable person. At a glance, she could tell Li Yundong's current realm. She couldn't help but sigh and say, the sect leader is really amazing. A few months ago, when he helped us on Mount Tianlong, he was only a person in the divine power realm. I didn't expect that in just a few months, he had already cultivated to the Jinshin phase. Chao Yi also sat down opposite Li Yundong and sighed with emotion. Yes, it's really like a dream. She stared at Li Yundong, who was meditating, and couldn't help but think of the time when Li Yundong had just agreed to take over the Fox Zen School. At that time, this boy had still been young and inexperienced, but now he had grown up to the point that people would feel awe at a glance. Lu Yuehong glanced at Li Yundong and said softly, "Six shimmy, what do you think? If the former sect leader comes back one day, what should we do?" Chao Yi's face suddenly darkened. She looked at Lu Yuehong unhappily and shouted in a low voice, "Shut up. How can you say such things here?" Lu Yuehong chuckled and said, "It's okay. The sect leader is meditating. He can't hear you." As soon as she finished speaking, she heard someone knocking on the door. A pretty voice was heard. "Li Yundong, it's me. You didn't answer my call. Open the door." Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong looked at each other. Chao Yi said, "See, the walls have ears." Lu Yuehong chuckled and said in a low voice, "It's okay. How could there be such a coincidence?" As she said this, she stood up and went to open the door. As soon as she opened the door, she saw a very beautiful girl standing at the door, looking at her in surprise. Lu Yuehong asked curiously, "Who are you?" It was Lu Feier who was standing at the door. She looked at Lu Yuehong with her mouth agape and tongue tied. She couldn't help but look past her and into the room. She stammered, I'm looking for Li Yundong. Has he changed rooms?" But she soon saw Li Yundong sitting cross-legged in the room, motionless. Lu Feier shouted at Li Yundong, "Hey, Li Yundong, what are you doing?" Lu Yuehong hurriedly said, "The sect leader is cultivating in seclusion. We can't disturb him now." Lu Feier was stunned. Cultivating in seclusion? No wonder he hasn't been seen in the past 2 days and didn't answer the phone. While she was muttering, she saw Chao Kefi coming over and asking with a smile, "Feier, what's wrong? Did you get the door closed again?" Lu Feier turned around and said angrily, "This Li Yundong is really annoying. How could he cultivate in seclusion in this hotel? I think he's deliberately avoiding us. Sister Chao, go and teach him a lesson." Chao Kefi walked to the door and also looked inside curiously. But as soon as she appeared, Lu Yuehong and Chao Yi suddenly trembled and stared at Chao Kefi with their eyes wide open. Seeing the two of them like this, Chao Kefi couldn't help touching her face. "Is there anything on my face?" Lu Feier said with a smile, "You are so beautiful, Sister Chao. Women can also be shocked." Chao Kefi said angrily, "Don't flatter me. Go back to your room." As she said this, she drove her to her room. Seeing that she was leaving with Lu Feier, Lu Yuehong couldn't help shouting, "Hey, wait." Chao Kefi turned her head and asked doubtfully, "Are you calling me?" Lu Feier pushed her and said with a low smile, "I'll go back first. You can talk to them." Chao Kefi nodded and walked up to Lu Yuehong. She asked with a smile, "What's the matter?" At this time, Chao Yi also came out. She looked around the corridor and then winked at Lu Yuehong. Lu Yuehong said with a smile, "Please come in and talk." Chao Kefi smiled and entered the door. After watching Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong close the door, she asked curiously, "Why are you looking at me so strangely? It seems that you have known me for a long time, but if I remember correctly, the first time we met should be at the opening ceremony of the Three Immortals, right?" Lu Yuehong looked excited. She said tentatively, "Senior Mystical Silver Fox, you really don't know who we are?" We are also." Before she could finish her words, Chao Yi behind her gently poked her, and Lu Yuehong immediately swallowed the rest of her words. When Chao Kefi heard the name of Mystical Silver Fox, her body suddenly trembled slightly and her face showed confusion. She murmured in a low voice, "Mystical Silver Fox? Who is this?" Chao Yi said cautiously, "Qianbei, don't you remember?" Chao Kefi's face became more and more confused. "Remember? What do you remember? Mystical Silver Fox? Who is Mystical Silver Fox?" Chao Kefi kept murmuring in a low voice. Pictures flashed through her mind one after another like a horse lantern. Some sealed memories emerged in pieces, as if a huge rock that had been suppressed under the deep sea had suddenly loosened and many bubbles emerged. Chao Kefi's chi and blood began to boil with her chaotic memories. She stared blankly at her hands and saw that the chi of the 5 elements was jumping around in her hands, changing unpredictably. When Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong saw this scene, their faces immediately lit up. They looked at each other in surprise, nodded, and waited nervously, as if they wanted Chao Kefi to remember something. But after waiting for a long time, they saw that Chao Kefi was still at a loss, as if she was in a trance, standing there blankly. Lu Yuehong couldn't help but reach out and gently push her shoulder. She asked tentatively, "Qian." Before she could finish her words, Chao Kefi suddenly raised her head. Her eyes were fierce, and she shot out like lightning. She slapped her shoulder and sent her flying. Lu Yuehong screamed and flew back like a cannonball. Just as she was about to hit Li Yundong, Chao Yi appeared beside her in the blink of an eye and held her, stopping her from moving forward. Lu Yuehong covered her shoulder, her pretty face pale, and her teeth kept trembling, as if a cold air had entered her body. She couldn't even speak. At this time, Chao Kefi's eyes had turned ferocious and terrifying blood red. Her fingers were like hooks, and she looked crazy. She stared fiercely at Lu Yuehong and Chao Yi, who were horrified, and said sternly, "Everyone in the world wants to kill me, so I will kill everyone in the world first. You are no exception. Go to hell." It was too late for Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong to regret and be frightened out of their wits. Just as they were about to scream, they saw a figure appear in the room. The figure rolled up his sleeves and covered their figures. He snorted angrily and said, "You two idiots, you want to complicate things with such a small matter. Let's go." After he rolled up his sleeves, Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong immediately disappeared from the room. Chao Kefi saw that they had disappeared, and she couldn't catch up with them. She couldn't help but look at Li Yunyang, who was meditating in the room. The blood-red light in her eyes suddenly became brighter and brighter. Her eyes flickered, and she laughed wickedly, "The revered Wisdom King, we meet again. I haven't seen you for 1,000 years. How are you? It's time for us to end our 1,000 years of grievances, ha ha ha." After that, Chao Kefi let out a shrill roar and turned over her palm. Her 5 fingers were like sharp iron hooks, and she slapped down on the top of Li Yunyang's head. At this time, Lu Feier's surprised cry and knocking came from the door. Sister Chao, what's wrong with you? What happened?" Chao Kefi's palm suddenly stopped moving. The Liuha, Bahuang, burning thumb pot, and fan of 7 treasures in front of her all jumped up like lightning and attacked her crazily. Chao Kefi's figure flashed and she instantly dodged the attacks of the 4 powerful magical weapons. After driving Chao Kefi away, the 4 powerful magical weapons did not chase after her. They still circled around Li Yunyang and loyally protected him. Chao Kefi flashed to the door of the bathroom and happened to see herself in the dressing mirror in the bathroom. She couldn't help but be stunned again. Chao Kefi's memories came back again. Her eyes were confused, and she said in a daze, "Sister Chao? Who is Sister Chao? Are you talking about me?" Chao Kefi was stunned for a long time. Her eyes changed, and the ferocious blood-red color in her eyes slowly faded. Her face calmed down again. After about a minute, she seemed to have forgotten what had just happened. Amidst Lu Feier's anxious shouts, she opened the door and walked out. Seeing her come out, Lu Feier quickly asked, "Sister Chao, what happened just now? I seem to hear you shouting." Chao Kefi smiled and said, "It's nothing. Did you hear wrong?" Lu Feier said angrily, "Have I become an old woman? Why do I keep hearing and seeing wrong things recently? Forget it. Do you want to go back and take a bath?" Chao Kefi smiled and said, "Okay, I'll take a bath first." Lu Feier said with a smile, "Haven't you always taken a bath first?" The two of them left Li Yunyang's room, talking and laughing, and walked towards their own rooms. Just as Chao Kefi closed the door of Li Yunyang's room and left, Li Yunyang, who was in a trance, opened his eyes, I'm exhausted. It took me 5 hours to write 2 chapters of 8,000 words. I can't make it in time for the 3rd chapter. Don't wait for me tonight, I'm sorry, you're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.